Very special moment. Mr. Eddie Van Halen.
Eddie Van Halen here. Telling you, keep playing, man. Gotta keep playing. It's the only thing there is. Music, man. Keep playing. All right? I'm gonna come looking for you if you don't.
Thank you very much.
Hey, this is Frank Hannon, and you're listening to Thunder Underground's tribute to Eddie Van Halen.
Welcome to episode 292 of the Thunder Underground podcast. Trent and Jason here as always. And this is normally where I say this week we've got so-and-so with us, but I'm not going to run through the list at this moment. We've got 14 people with us today.
Yeah. I mean, we'll get into it. You guys will figure it out.
Right. And that's because we're celebrating Eddie Van Halen. Unless you've been living in Antarctica without internet or something for the past 2 weeks, I'm sure you know by now that Eddie Van Halen passed away a little under 2 weeks ago by the time we're putting this out. So, yeah. Unfortunately, of course, so we decided to dedicate a full episode to this. And when we started talking about it, we're like, hey, there's a few people we had in mind we could get on here to, do a full episode with, just talk about Eddie Van Halen. But as we were just kind of messaging back and forth about it, like, why not just hit up a bunch of people and, just talk to each person for 5, 10, 15 minutes and compile it together. And that's what we ended up doing. We reached out to a lot of people, and the majority of them got back to us and were able to work out a time to record something. So that's what we've got coming up here. It's cool. We've got people from all across the board, all styles of rock, and that have been around since some as long as Eddie and some just a few years. So we got a wide array of stuff here.
But all have been on the show, right?
Oh, yeah, that's the other thing.
Or upcoming.
Right. Yeah, we made sure it was all people that were either past guests or people that we already had scheduled to record, like in the past 2 weeks.
Exactly.
So, yeah, we wanted to keep it at that. I didn't want to get a hold of someone that we had never had a podcast say, hey, I just want to talk to you for 7 minutes about Eddie Van Halen.
Exactly.
Not you, but
yeah.
I'm sure the people would have done it because Eddie Van Halen, of course, meant a shitload of people.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, before we get into everything Eddie Van Halen, we need to let you know that we're sponsored by Hella Hot Sauce. It's a hot sauce company based out of the San Francisco Bay Area. They're a mom and pop style operation. They make small batch artisan hot sauces. You can see their entire list at HellaHotHotSauce.com. They've got collaborations with some rock artists like Ghoul. They have a sauce called Brain Jerk. And Florida Frank from Hatebreed has a sauce called Florida Frank's Florida Heat. You can check out both those and all their other sauces, like I said, at HellaHotHotSauce.com. Follow them on Facebook and Instagram at HellaHotHotSauce. If you're on the West Coast, they're in a lot of stores out there. If you're anywhere else like us, order that stuff online if you like hot sauce. I promise you it's hot, but it's also got a hell of a lot of flavor, which is what you want. So check out Hella Hot Sauce and tell them we sent you. Sunset Tattoo is a tattoo shop in Tulsa, Oklahoma at 3146 East 15th Street. They're right in the heart of Midtown. Their tattoos are done good and proper. They're state licensed. And above all else, they are mother approved. Jake Thompson and his crew have over 25 years of experience. They do excellent work. You can get on their Facebook, Sunset Tattoo Tulsa, or their Instagram, at Sunset Tattoo Tulsa, to check out photos of all their work. I know that Jake does great work at cover-ups. I've seen a lot of photos that he's posted of people that needed some bad work redone, and he did them right. So give him a call or shoot him a message for a time to set up an appointment to talk about what work you need to have done. Also, MedFarm is a dispensary in Broken Arrow, Oklahoma, 24683 East Highway 51. They're right off the highway. You can't miss them. They've got a big selection, and you can check it out online at leafly.com. Their website is medfarmok.com. That's PHARM. You can find them on Facebook, MedFarm, and on Instagram at medfarmok. They're always running specials, so follow them on all those so you don't miss any of that. One of their ongoing specials is if you mention Thunder Underground, they'll give you 10% off your first order, which is really cool. And most importantly, they're cannabis with a cause, because 30% of their proceeds are going to build no-kill animal shelters, which is a very cool cause that pretty much no other dispensaries are doing that I know of, at least in this area. So get over to MedFarm, so nearly a third of what you pay goes to a great cause. You can also pull up and go right through the drive-thru. If you call ahead or text ahead, they'll have it ready for you right when you pull up. So get over to MedFarm and tell them Thunder Underground sent you. Finally, we've got DEB Concerts, our longest-running sponsor, based right here in Tulsa, Oklahoma. They are a concert promoter that has brought in a lot of great acts to downtown Tulsa, like Saxon, Last in Line, Great White, Warrant, Beasto Blanco, Striper, long-ass list. They keep bringing more in. Just this Friday night, they've got John Corabi coming. October 23rd, doing an acoustic performance, socially distanced out there at the Ideal Ballroom. Rocket Science will be opening that show. You can find ticket info at debconcerts.com. And also, they just recently announced, I did not write down the date, but Lita Ford is coming. I believe it's December 12th.
I didn't even know that.
Oh, you didn't? Yeah, Doug announced this a few days ago.
Oh, that...
And
Fuck me. Melissa told me about that the other day, and I was like, what are you talking? No, that was back then. I don't know what you're talking about. Because I didn't even... Fuck, I'm stupid. I had no idea. That's great.
And it's an acoustic show, so it's
okay.
Something different. From Lita Ford, she's got Patrick Kennison with her. It'll be the two of them doing an acoustic performance.
Good.
And that show will be opened by Paralandra doing a acoustic performance from them as well. So it'll be an acoustic night all around. And that show will be hosted by Eddie Trunk, who has hosted quite a bit of the shows out there at the Ideal Ballroom. And, like we've mentioned many times, the Ideal Ballroom is set up with a great system in place that pulls out, it's supposed to be 99.9% of all airborne and surface germs. So they are set up to be a little bit more socially responsible than most clubs are. So get out there and check out both those shows upcoming. And, of course, follow DEB Concerts on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. Tell them we sent you. And one more thing, I know Doug Burgess, who runs DEB Concerts, is a massive fan of Eddie Van Halen. So just wanted to throw that out. He has one of the, I believe, the Frankenstein Strats.
Oh, cool.
Like in a case. I remember seeing a picture a couple years ago, and then he posted it recently, of course, after Eddie passed. But it's pretty impressive setup he's got. Like it looks like something you would see at a Hard Rock Cafe or something, like in a full-on glass case with the red and white striped guitar and some other stuff. But yeah, so just jumping into this, I guess where are we going to start here?
Well, I mean,
you want to start? Let's start.
I think you could go with, we could get into our lists and kind of what Van Halen meant to us, or whatever talking points,
Yeah, I wanted to ask you
to kind of kick it off and then go into,
because something I kind of asked most of the people we talked to, not every one of them, but the majority of them, was like, do you remember the first time you heard Van Halen?
Oh, I mean, I don't remember specifically.
Right.
And I was thinking about this, and I knew you were going to ask something like this, so kind of had an answer prepared. Jump.
Yeah.
1984, I was 8, and it didn't matter if you were 8 or 80. You couldn't escape that song or that band, that record that year. And 1984 was such a cool fucking year anyways. You know, the summer, the Olympics, all the music, whatever.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I'm 8, so I'm just kind of like, whatever. I don't know.
Right.
The main thing I worried about at 8 was, you know, being able to have a full-on Pepsi instead of a Diet Pepsi.
Right.
You know.
Make sure you didn't miss G.I. Joe on TV or something.
Right, yeah. So there's that. And that's, you know, and you don't think about the history or the whatevers, you know. But I think for when Van Halen really came on my radar was, you know, 2 or 3 years later when you're starting to get into adolescence and you're starting to figure out what you like and don't like and blah, 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 blah. And, you know, we all loved pop music at the time, the pop music of the 80s. And then getting into the rock side of that, bands like Bon Jovi and Van Halen, you know, really kind of helped get you into the rock.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think that the Sammy Hagar era really married those two worlds of pop and rock together real beautifully. And one of the first things I remember hearing was Finish What You Started. And I wanted that record, OU812. And I remember asking my mom, you know, we were getting ready to go to Walmart. You know, I want to get a record. She's like, what you want to get? And I told her, and my dad was in the bathroom, like washing his hands or something, excuse me. And he poked his head out. He's like, nope, you can't get that. And I'm like, why? And he's like, that means something bad. And I'm like, OU812? He's like, quit, don't say that. And I'm like, and to this day, I still really don't totally understand. I think it's just some antiquated 70s, 80s fucking dumb term for something sexual or something that doesn't mean fuck about shit. It's just something that, you know, stupid 80s guys said back then, you know.
Yeah.
Dudes in their 20s or something, because when you look back on all the 80s shit, it's all kind of dumb anyways. All the sayings and the way people acted and the, you know, whatever.
You remember Totally Tubular?
Oh, God. Anyways, moving right along. So, but there were so many great songs that really spoke to me then because it, you know, it kept me in that pop world, and it was stuff it was palatable for me. Stuff I could digest, but it also was, you know, kind of luring me into the rock world. So for me, that's kind of what I really look at Van Halen as, and, you know, hold in high regard as just one of those gateways.
Yeah.
So that's kind of my first memories of it. And that's, you know, why I love the Hagar era way better than the Roth era. Not to take anything away from Roth era, but that's just, you know, my age and what I like. That's just where I lie on the subject.
Yeah.
So that's mine. You know, what about you?
It's pretty similar, identical on the timeline at least, because we're the same. I mean, I'm only, 6, 7 months younger than you. So,
right.
Like, I distinctly remember it was probably 85 or something. I don't know that I had a, you know, one of those giant radios that had a turntable on top of it and a cassette player.
Yeah.
And then like 2 big speakers.
Yes.
I mean, I'm not talking like the 5-foot tall ones, but you know, like a foot tall speakers or whatever that. And the only records that I remember owning, because that was the cassette era, you know, I was getting cassettes. So, but I owned Weird Al Yankovic, Eat It, which was, that was Bad, right?
Right.
Was the name of the album. Which is funny because that plays into Beat It, which has Eddie on it. And then I had Kiss Alive because I got it, I think, at a pawn shop or something.
Nice.
I still have it. And it's just like total shitty, like the cover's all fucked.
Right.
And then I had 1984.
Okay.
And those are the only 3 albums I had. And I listened to it and loved it. But it wasn't, kind of like you said, it wasn't until I got old enough to like when we really started diving deep into music when you're like 12 or something, which would have been the end of the 80s, 88, 89. So it was the same thing, you know, like the Sammy stuff from OU812, and then, you know, after getting 5150, and then it was still one of those bands like them, and like you mentioned, Bon Jovi and then Def Leppard.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
all those that, you know.
That's another one, yeah.
And then Motley Crue and all these bands I was really getting into, Poison. But it wasn't until For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge came out in 91 that, like,
yeah.
when that came out.
That's when, yeah, I agree. I'm the same.
I went from being, I like this band to being a diehard
Yeah,
fan.
you're like, okay, here we go.
Yeah.
Here we go.
And I mean, by that point, I'd had Van Halen 1, but I think that's still the only earlier album I'd had at that point.
Exactly, yeah.
And then by that point, I loved it so much that I just wanted to get everything.
Yeah.
You know, so that kind of goes into another question I had is like, For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge came out in, I believe, 91, right? 192. Yeah, it was 91. And so I was 14. And I remember hearing Pound Cake for the first time and thinking, it's just one of those things. I don't even play guitar, and it just blew my mind. I'm like, this guy's using an electric drill. This is like the coolest thing I've ever heard of in my life.
Exactly.
And I just like, when I got that album, I listened to that shit over and over. And I'm like, I wish this drill part was longer, you know, and just like, I would just like replay it over and over. And it still to this day just sounds cool as hell.
Yeah.
Almost 30 years later, you know?
Right. Well, you know, and I think, yeah, what you're saying, real quick, you know, I want to go back to finish what you started.
Oh, yeah.
It's not lost on me that is like a clean sound, you know, it didn't have any of Eddie's, you know, guitar acrobatics. It was almost like, you know, some of it had a kind of a country vibe. But for some reason, that song is what perked my ears up at the time. I don't know. But anyways, yes, For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge was just fucking, I mean, it was just one of those records everybody had, like the Black Album or Appetite for Destruction or whatever. And it was, I mean, it sounds fucking perfect. It's just perfect hard rock. Top of the World, Judgment Day, Pound Cake. God, it's just a great fucking record, man.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just insane. I've listened to it like 4 times in the last 2 weeks, front to back. Just pure, you know, early Van Halen has that fire, but man, this is just, I don't know, for me, that's where it's at.
Yeah.
I don't want to say anything insulting to the other era or the other records, but for me, that was it. And then Balance, holy shit. I mean, we could do an hour just talking about Balance.
Yeah.
We won't, but you know what I mean.
Right. Well, I mean, you mentioned a minute ago, it's like the age, you know, it's kind of like when you...
And it is, and
when
that's
you latch
fine.
when you latch on to a band, you know, it's like, I can totally understand why people that are 6, 8, 10 years older than us
love Roth.
Got turned off when Sammy came along, because
Yeah.
even a couple people that are coming up here in a minute, you know,
Yeah.
said things like that. It's like, I know CJ said it. It's like you had the attitude, you know, of like, I ain't talking about love. And then all of a sudden it's like, why can't this be love? You know, so it's, I'm like, and I get it, but I just love it all, you know?
Yeah, exactly. But it's just like, you know, I've heard it said about, you know, SNL, for instance, and I'm a huge SNL geek, but they say, you know, no matter how old you are, whatever season of SNL, whatever era of SNL you were at in like junior high or high school, you think is the best.
That's a good point.
The best era, no matter what really is the best era or not. And that's fucking so true.
Yeah.
And that's true for a lot of the bands and the music we like too. I mean, it makes sense because that's your formative years. That's where, you know, you have memories connected to that shit and this and that, whatever. You get the idea.
Well, I mean, I would love to have been able, you know, because a theme that ran through a good majority of these interviews we have coming up, especially with people that are older than us, was that the experience of hearing Eruption and Running with the Devil. I said Running with the Devil and Eruption for the first time, you know, and it's like, this didn't, you know, nothing like this really existed.
See, now that's a good point right there.
So, I mean, that would have been cool as shit to be able to experience that, you know?
Imagine I mean, once we heard Eruption, we had all this shit that we've heard for years.
Yeah.
All the shredding, all the things that Eddie Van Halen started, we'd already heard.
All these bands were doing it in the 80s by the
to
time
drop that needle and hear that for the first time, not hearing anything, I mean, holy fuck. We'll never have that experience. What do we have that comes close to it? oh, the first time we heard fucking Corn or something, oh wow, no one sounds like that. That's what we got. Everybody else got fucking Van Halen. I mean, that's fucking makes them way cooler than us, dude.
Right.
Yeah. And I'm not really trying to slag on Corn, but just relative to that, that's yeah.
Yeah.
So, anyways.
Yeah, something else that, I thought is cool is that obviously you've seen since Eddie passed, you've seen all the people come out, musicians, not just talking about what he meant to them, like at a young age, hearing guitar for the first time, or that kind of guitar for the first time. But you hear him talking about like all the cool stuff he did, for them or whoever. But hearing like the channel on Sirius XM, they've got a lot of guest DJs. Yes. I don't know if you've heard any of these.
Yeah, I've heard a few. I've heard like Tom Morello.
Yeah, his was
and
really
the Jerry
cool.
Cantrell one.
Okay, I haven't heard that one. Vernon Reed.
Oh man, I didn't hear that one.
I heard that one yesterday when I was driving. His was really good because he went in a lot. I listened to the Bret Michaels full one, which was cool. But Bret Michaels is Bret Michaels, so he kind of stuck to the surface hits and stuff. Yeah. But Vernon Reed went deep on everything.
Because Vernon Reed is deep on everything, and he's a deep cat, and that's why we love him.
Yeah, and he even he's just would talk about you need to listen to this part at the beginning of. I don't remember off the top of my head, little guitars, just rent, Spanish Fly. He'd play all the stuff that was intricate and obviously meant something to him. But just to hear, stuff like that from people all across the board, like when you hear Steve Vai, who is regarded as one of the best of all time, say that you can't, when he joined David Lee Roth Band, there's no point even trying to, to play like Eddie because you can't.
Yeah.
And to hear that from someone that's regarded as highly as Eddie, is
exactly
really cool too.
Exactly, yeah.
Something else I had written down I wanted to ask you. I thought of it pretty quickly after he passed, and I even brought it up, I think maybe in the Damon Johnson talk. And do you think will ever see Alex Van Halen get on a stage again and play live? Because do you remember him ever performing with anybody else?
No, I don't.
Because Eddie would do guest spots here and there, but
Alex never did. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I think the only way that might happen is if after this whole virus bullshit is gone. If I don't know, maybe they do some kind of tribute show for Eddie or something. Yeah, somewhere maybe, but I just don't see that.
Because I
just don't see that going on.
I mean, Eddie's the type of once in a lifetime enigma that you can make a Freddie Mercury style tribute show out of. Yeah, like a massive show broadcast all over the place, especially today's age with the internet. So I mean, that's a good point.
Yeah, but I mean, other than that, I don't know.
If Wolfgang goes on tour, he might could get him out there for a show or two.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. And I think I can only imagine, that Wolfgang, we know he's a great musician. I'm pretty sure whatever he puts out, I'll probably like it. And it's just a goddamn shame that, he's just going to get hounded and pounded about his dad the whole time. Yeah. And he's going to get compared, and it's...
I couldn't imagine...
I couldn't.
Once this album finally comes out, if he does press on it, you're going to get these jackasses that are God. Doing a 12-minute interview and 10 and a half minutes of it are about Eddie.
I know. It's going to be insane. It's the poor guy. I can already... we could go on about that, too. Who knows?
Well, another thing that popped in my head is maybe Wolfgang's been working on this thing for a couple years. Maybe Eddie's a guest on a song or two. You never know.
Well, and that's the thing is, he had his own studio. God knows what kind of music he recorded over the last, 20 years?
Oh, yeah.
Or, 10 years since they did a record or whatever. Who knows what could come out still. I mean, it's just, you never know.
Yeah, I want, know if there's full songs or if they could even do something if there's songs without vocals and have Dave or Sammy come in and complete something.
Yeah, who knows?
But that's not really.
Yeah, that's just all the speculation that, we could go on and on about forever.
Yeah. Yeah, and another thing that I remember seeing shortly after, maybe the next day, Jim Wilson, who is one of our guests here coming up, made a post and said, this is like Elvis dying.
Yeah, it is.
And
yeah,
it's
that's
like,
exactly what it is.
And, on I mentioned that to my mom, who's a diehard Elvis fan, and she's like, is it really that, because she's like, is it really that big, She was like asking me seriously, and I'm like, someone, that's older and didn't listen to this style of music, I explained to her what he meant to the guitar and how he changed things that kind of Hendrix had changed, and he took it to another level,
Because think about it, not only, was he just an amazingly talented, groundbreaking player, but all the shit he did on the gear side of it. He had his own line of gear, and he had his own, he would make his own shit. He would tear shit apart and rewire shit that that most of us wouldn't even think about doing.
Yeah.
So there's a whole other department to, what's going on here too.
Right.
Can't forget that.
And even along those same lines, J.J. French, there was a story that came out today on Blabbermouth, I think, that he said in an interview that Eddie is as important as Jimi Hendrix and Chuck Berry to rock and roll.
Well, I think that's exactly right.
And that's another great point.
Yeah.
And I think, like I've mentioned this to you, I think, and Jason Carroll, and I think he's, besides Paul McCartney, he's the most significant, he was the most significant living rock musician left.
Yeah.
I can't think of anyone more significant to what they did for rock and roll than Paul McCartney.
I get that.
And
and
Ozzy, might be a bigger force, as far as when Ozzy passes, it might even be a bigger thing. But it's like, as much as I love Ozzy and as important as Black Sabbath was, I don't think Ozzy singularly is as important as Eddie Van Halen.
I get that. And like...
The same with all the guys in Led Zeppelin or...
The Stones or something.
Aerosmith or the Stones. They're all important bands, but I think just each guy individually is not as important as Eddie Van Halen is individually.
I get that, yeah.
So, we're getting down here to the slim pickings on
I know.
who's left. And we lost... In 2020 now, we've lost arguably one of the greatest guitarists of all time and arguably one of the greatest drummers of all time.
Yeah, exactly. It's shit.
With Neil Peart at the beginning of the year.
Right.
Well, we've also got our top 10 lists of... We each made a top 10 list of both eras, and I think we had there's a couple other things I wanted to mention, but do we want to jump into one of these clips first?
Let's get these top 10s out of the way.
I didn't want to do that in between the clips.
And then just guests from here on out.
Okay.
That's the meat of the program.
Okay.
I
didn't know if we wanted to space it out or what.
No more dilly-dallying, Trent.
Okay, gotcha. Well, coming up, actually, one other thing to mention, coming up this Sunday night at the Ideal Ballroom, Tom Green, who runs the Ideal Ballroom, is putting on an Eddie Van Halen tribute show, along with Josh Jones and Homer Larry Robinson. And it's going to have, I haven't ever seen a complete list, but they're going to have a bunch of other people from the area out there celebrating the life of Eddie Van Halen. And I know there's other stuff in the works. I know that there's a tribute band in Oklahoma called Next Halen that did a show last night in Oklahoma City. There's a deal that, CJ was a part of that he talks about and his deal coming up. And I know this is happening all over the country, probably in all over the world.
You know it.
If you're in the Tulsa area, this Sunday night, October 25th at the Ideal Ballroom. And I think that's... Oh, and also our Van Halen, every album in a row.
Oh, yeah. Go back and listen to that.
Yeah. Two or 3 years ago, I didn't look at the date. Every album in a row, as it states. If you've never heard us do those, we've done it with a lot of major bands, and Van Halen was one of them. I said some things in there that if you listen to it now, probably sound shitty, because I remember saying that Eddie was a dick, but that's based off of when it comes to band stuff, It's like, I'm talking defending Michael Anthony or Sammy or whatever at times. And I think really the only people that Eddie was probably ever like that was people in his band, And, you could understand because as this comes out, you've seen the stuff from Jerry Cantrell about how Eddie treated him on their first tour.
Yeah, totally.
You'll hear it in a minute from Damon Johnson on how he treated Brother Kane early in their career, and you've seen a million other stories. But all right, so we each put together a top 10 list for the Roth era and then a top 10 list for the Hagar era because, I'm being cheap here and saying it'd be too damn hard for me to put together a top 10 list of just
Oh, man.
Van Halen songs.
It would be way too fucking hard.
Because, as we all know, there's literally only two bands in the existence of rock and roll or probably any music that I can think of that have two eras with two different singers that you could put on a concert and fill the concert up with songs from that era, and everybody in the crowd would practically know almost every song.
Yeah.
You could play nothing but Roth songs and it'd be filled with hits, and play nothing but Hagar songs be filled with hits.
Exactly.
AC/DC is the only other band that has two singers with catalogs like that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So, all right. So, David Lee Roth first, since that came first.
Okay.
You want to go first? Or you want me to?
Sure. Are we doing it from 10 to 1 or 1 to 10?
Yeah, let's go 10 to 1.
Okay. Well, for the DLR era, my top 10, starting with 10, going up to 1. Hot for Teacher, Mean Streets, Loss of Control.
Nice.
Atomic Punk, Beautiful Girls. 5, Where Have All the Good Times Gone? 4, In the Cradle Will Rock. 3, Ain't Talking About Love. 2, Unchained. And 1, I'm the One. Those are my favorites.
Nice.
And I try to stay away from all the big hits and the singles, but you just can't deny Hot for Teacher.
Yeah, I mean, I thought that too, but it's like impossible on some of this when it comes to this band, especially.
Yeah.
I like that I think we only have 4 songs the same, maybe.
Well, good.
So, which is cool.
It's varied.
My top 10, starting with 10, was Romeo Delight.
Nice.
And it was kind of hard for me for that final spot, and I was deciding between that and, like, Bottoms Up, Somebody Call Me a Doctor, DOA, Light Up the Sky, Fools. All these songs are freaking fantastic.
Yeah.
But we could only do 10. So Romeo Delight had Mean Streets at 9.
Oh, okay, we were even the same on 9.
Oh, okay. Feel Your Love Tonight at 8. 7, Beautiful Girls. Number 6, Everybody Wants Some. That's like just pure attitude. I fucking love it. Number 5 is I'll Wait, which to me is just like the epitome of 80s when you hear it.
Yeah, it really is.
But it's like so freaking amazing.
Yeah.
And I can't just like, I almost love it so much I almost wanted to put it at 2, but I can't put it above these other few songs in front of it.
I see that.
And it's I think it's Kevin Graham, our buddy Kevin Graham, that claims that this is his favorite Van Halen song of all time. So
nice.
Kind of cool. Number 4, Panama. I couldn't leave this off because to me, Panama is the quintessential Van Halen song.
I see.
All 4 members shine on this thing.
Right.
It's just fantastic. Number 3, Drop Dead Legs. To me, this is the quintessential David Lee Roth song. I freaking love it. It's my favorite song off of 1984. Number 2, Unchained. We all know that undeniably is one of the greatest riffs of all time.
Yeah, it is.
Did you have that at number 2 as well?
Yeah.
Or 3, okay.
Yep.
And in number 1, Ain't Talking About Love.
Nice.
Is tied for my favorite Van Halen song of all time.
There you go.
My number 1 Hagar song. So. All right, into the Hagar stuff.
Yes. Sammy Hagar era. At number 10, I had Cabo Wabo.
Yeah.
It's just catchy as fuck. 9, Judgment Day.
Oh, yeah.
8, Pound Cake. 7, Can't Stop Loving You.
I like that pick.
Right, to Amsterdam. 5, Summer Nights. 4, Why Can't This Be Love? 3, Finish What You Started. 2, Best of Both Worlds. And number 1, my favorite Sammy Hagar era song, and my favorite Van Halen song ever, Humans Being.
And that's awesome that your favorite song came out like 1996 or 5,
it's just
whatever it was.
The solo's badass. I liked it. I like the low Humans Being, you know, and it's one of their heavier songs. It was just, it's just fucking great.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just all you'd want.
Yeah, to me, that's one of the rare songs that a lot of bands can definitely pull off heaviness, darkness, and brightness.
Right,
You know,
at the same time.
Yeah, Typo Negative was really good at it.
Yeah.
Most bands can't do it in the same song.
And I remember thinking, oh, well, this is cool. It's like a soundtrack. It's probably a throwaway song. I'll listen to it. And I was like, holy fuck, I love this song.
Yeah.
You know, how is this not on a record? So
it's like the song's just so dark, and
Yeah.
then his solo is so bright.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if that's a good term or not. But like, it's every time I listen to it, I'm just like, this gives me hope that there's never going to be another tornado in Oklahoma. You know?
Right? I mean, and the video's cool. I mean, except for Michael Anthony's mullet, but whatever. But it's just great, man.
Yeah. For those of you, for some reason, aren't familiar with this song, it came out after Balance. It was on the Twister soundtrack.
Yeah.
Which also features a song of just Eddie and Alex. I forgot the name of it, which is really cool.
Okay, yeah.
I heard it the other day on Sirius. I hadn't heard it in years.
Yeah.
All right. My number 10 is Amsterdam. We both had that. Fantastic deep cut off of Balance. I had like Finish What You Started, Seventh Seal, Can't Stop Loving You, Top of the World, 5150 that I all wanted to put on there, but I had to go with Amsterdam to finish out the list.
Gotcha.
Number 9, Black and Blue from OU812. To me, I just still remember when I was a kid hearing this song, just blown away that they were singing about having sex so much that like they got bruised. Right? And that's what Sammy's saying. I'm just like, this is fucking amazing. You know, when in your 13-year-old mind, you know?
Right.
Number 8, Don't Tell Me What Love Can Do.
Nice.
That riff is just insane. This whole song, another amazing song off Balance. That riff is like, the sound of that riff is like if a knife made a sound when it cut through something, it would be that riff.
I like that.
Yeah. Number 7, I've got your number 1, Humans Being.
Okay.
Number 6, Cabo Wabo. 7 minutes of pure fucking amazingness. Number 5, Summer Nights. I guess we both had that at number 5. Number 4, Run Around from For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge. Number 3, Why Can't This Be Love? Which is one of the greatest ballads of all time. And it's the great thing about that is the music itself doesn't sound like a ballad. It's kind of up-tempo.
Right.
But the way Sammy sings it is a little bit slower tempo than the music.
I see.
Which is in a ballad sense, you know. But number 2, Pound Cake. One of the greatest songs of all time. And in number 1, Best of Both Worlds.
There you go.
Which is my favorite Van Halen song, tied with Ain't Talking About Love.
Of course.
Yeah. 5150 is my favorite Van Halen album.
Good.
As you could see, my top 5 had 3 songs from that album. And Van Halen 1, I'm probably tied with for my number 1, 1A and 1 and 1A.
Right.
Where are you at on your favorite album?
Oh, it's definitely 5150.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. There's no question.
All right. Well, our first guest here falls into that same category, actually. As far as, not saying 5150, but he's a little bit younger than us, actually, so that also plays into the fact of why he's probably a bigger Hagar era fan.
Right.
But first person we got here is Tony Asta from Battlecross, one of the 2 guitarists from Battlecross. And I wanted to mention that I just wanted to throw him in first because as we're talking about Eddie Van Halen and how significant he was to us and all these people we've got coming up, Battlecross is pretty significant to our podcast.
Right.
The first national touring band that we went out to a show and interviewed live. It wasn't Tony on that one. It was the singer Kyle Gumby. It's still actually to this day the only podcast that we had a video of as well.
Exactly. And they've been on since, 3 times in total, I think.
Well, no, Gumby's been on 3 times and Tony as well. So 4.
4, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. So, yeah, anyways. And they're always very giving of their time, and it's really cool. It was really cool, as we went through this, to go to multiple shows and they remember us and shit.
Yeah.
That was cool. So, yeah, definitely. This band means a lot to us.
Yeah. Yeah, Tony was on episode 101. So check that one out. Battlecross is a pretty heavy band, but I always love it whenever you hear bands, especially from the really heavy side of things, talking about someone like Eddie Van Halen, what he meant to him, So here's Here's Tony from Battlecross.
Hey, what's up, Thunder Underground? This is Tony Asta, guitarist of Battlecross. Thanks for having me. So some of my earliest memories of really getting down deep and jamming out some Van Halen would have to be in the early 90s, mid-90s, because at the time my brother had a massive CD collection, and I was fortunate enough to dig through those from time to time. 5150 and for Unlawful Carnal Knowledge. For whatever reason, those two I just always put on all the time. And then sometime after that, Diver Down, Fair Warning, just the classics. But anyway, that was right around the time I started playing guitar, now in 96. So, yeah, huge influence. Eddie Van Halen's playing not only influenced me and countless other guitar players and musicians, but, countless bands as well. Like some of our favorite bands today, obviously influenced by Van Halen. Game changers, big time. So, and I have to admit, my favorite era is the Hagar stuff. So, don't hate, appreciate. And I know that Eddie had a lot to do with the arranging and obviously the piano work and all that stuff. Even though he did a lot of the synth and stuff early on, just the shit that he does combined with Sammy Hagar, for whatever reason, is just, to me, it just stands out so much. I mean, one of the signature things that Eddie did was the tapping. I mean, every guitar player knows that, right? It's the way he tapped. It's the way the tone he had in his fingers and how he played. And not only that, but the gear that he used and how he modified his gear. And I don't know if this is true, but apparently he played dead strings all the time. That had something to do with his, apparently with his tone as well. So, but to go back to the tapping technique, other guitar players have used it, but the way that Eddie Van Halen incorporated it and the way that he played it and just the tone he had in his hands just changed everything, I think. And if you check out any of our stuff, any of the Battlecross material, you'll hear that influence in my playing as well. I'm not 1% of what Eddie Van Halen is on guitar. I'm not saying anything like that, but he definitely influenced me. So, rock in peace, the late, great, legendary, the one and only, the king, Eddie Van Halen.
There you go, Tony from Battlecross. He's actually the only one that we didn't have a call with to record. Couldn't set up a time, but he graciously sent us over that audio.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And so we're very glad to have Tony back here on the podcast. So once again, check out episode 101. Check out Battlecross if you haven't. If you love some old school thrash, I think you'll like some new school metal that Battlecross brings to the fold. So check them out. All right, so just rolling right into the next one then. This one's pretty significant to me because this is one of my favorite guitarists of all time. Talking about another one of my favorite guitarists of all time. And I know you probably fall in that category as well.
Mm-hmm.
With Frank Hannon from Tesla.
Oh, man. Such an honor to have him back.
Yeah. Frank Hannon, of course, has been one of the two guitarists of Tesla since the very beginning. And I mean, they've been around since the mid-'80s, and they were even City Kid before that in the earlier '80s. And, so Frank's been in bands since a few years after Van Halen came out, but he was pretty young whenever Van Halen 1 came out, as you'll hear in this talk with him. But let's just jump into this right now. Here's Frank Hannon of Tesla.
Oh, yeah, man. Definitely. When that first came out in 1978, when Van Halen 1 first came out, I had been playing guitar for about, a year or so. I was 11 years old. And my cousin and I, we were listening to, Creedence Clearwater, and the hardest heavy rock that we would listen to would be Aerosmith, and stuff like that, maybe Ted Nugent. But then when Van Halen 1 came out, I got the record at a store called Tower Records here in Sacramento and brought it home, and it blew my mind. I would try every trick in the book with the turntable to slow it down to try to figure out what the heck he was playing, you know? Especially Ain't Talking About Love. The guitar riff to Ain't Talking About Love, the intro to that, just sounded like a machine. I had never heard a guitar player play with such aggressive conviction and sound like Eddie Van Halen did on Van Halen 1.
Well, being 11, a pretty impressionable age, I mean, did that like kind of change the way you were playing?
Well, I wasn't really that good of a guitar player at 11 years old anyway, so it didn't really change the way I was playing, other than it just freaked me out and kind of scared me a little bit, like, wow, how is that even possible, you know, to create a sound like that was so technically just perfect, but aggressive and bluesy and everything that I loved about guitar from all my other guitar heroes, but taken to a whole nother futuristic level. So, you know, fast forward to when Tesla and we started making our own music and everything. I was definitely influenced by Eddie Van Halen on Tesla's first album, Mechanical Resonance. I mean, if you listen to Coming At You Live and, you know, doing a guitar solo on an album, you know, like that. On our first album, we wanted to do our own version of Eruption. And so if you listen to Coming At You Live, that was influenced, you know, and a lot of my picking technique, like on Modern Day Cowboy and the hammer-ons that we do, were influenced by Eddie Van Halen. But to take it even further than that, I kind of had to choose to try to not be like Eddie Van Halen, because everybody, all the guitar players on the planet, George Lynch, you know, the guy from White Lion, everybody in the 80s was trying to play Eddie Van Halen's style of guitar. So me personally, I decided, well, I can't really do it anyway. As much as I love it, I may as well just stick to playing a Gibson SG and stay more classic orientated, if that makes any sense. I had to kind of change my style to try to find an original style, you know. But Eddie Van Halen definitely influenced me as a guitarist who liked to play keyboards as well. And so, like, even if you listen to Tesla's first album, you know, changes and stuff that I was doing on the piano was influenced by the fact that Eddie played both piano and guitar, and that influenced me a lot.
Right. Well, when you think of, like, say, later Tesla music, do you hear anything in it, like whether, if it's not from you, maybe from Tommy or later on from Dave, that sounds like that there's an impact from Eddie, whether it be on the tone or the style or anything?
Well, yeah, Eddie Van Halen had an impact on modern guitar tone, technique, you know, playing chords higher up on the neck, you know, using the hammer-ons and stuff. So, yeah, and definitely the whammy bar stuff. Tommy Skeoch used a Floyd Rose a lot on the early Tesla albums. And, you know, anytime he touched a whammy bar, you know, it was definitely driven by Eddie Van Halen. But I want to say something else, though, is that Eddie Van Halen, his sound and his guitar playing really just reflected his spirit and his personality as a guy. I got to meet him only one time in our whole career, and he was so friendly, man. Gave me a big hug and a kiss, and like welcomed me into the dressing room for a couple hours, and we sat around and talked, and he treated me like a friend that I've known for years, and I had only met him the one time. And that's just the kind of guy he was. He was real outwardly friendly, and had a really warm personality and just fun, you know, just super fun, you know, and you can see that in his smile, and you can see that in his stage presence, and definitely hear it in the way he played guitar, man. He was fun. Yeah.
Well, was that, did Tesla not ever play on a bill with Van Halen, or was that just like a show you went to?
That was a show that I went to locally in Sacramento, because I knew a lot of guys that worked for him on the road crew that also would work for us on part-time basis too. So despite all the people that I knew that knew him, I didn't get enough chance to really hang out with him that much. Unfortunately, I wish I had more time to hang out with him more, but no, we never toured with Van Halen. But now we toured with David Lee Roth in the early days, but not with Van Halen.
Well, you mentioned Ain't Talking About Love. Do you have any other like songs or albums that are like, if you're going to listen to Van Halen tonight, what would be your go-to?
Honestly, the first 4 Van Halen albums, in fact, I was having this conversation with my son the other day. I'm not sure if Van Halen 1 or Van Halen 2, even, which one is better, because they're both phenomenal. And, Women and Children First is a lot of fun, but then you go to Fair Warning, and I love that album too. So I go through phases, but right now I'm listening to Van Halen 2, man, because Bottoms Up and Spanish Fly and DOA and Light Up the Sky and Women in Love. I mean, those songs are just freaking amazing songs. I think they actually did step it up a little bit compared to the first album.
There you go, Frank Hannon of Tesla, and of course of the Frank Hannon Band as well.
Of course.
Frank's been on this podcast 2 times previously, episode 183 and episode 252. Dig back through and check those out. Both of those were fun. It was a big honor for, I know, both of us to have a member of Tesla on here, especially it being Frank, who I know you've stated many times throughout the history of this podcast is one of the most underrated guitarists in rock.
Oh, for sure.
Glad to have him on here talking about Eddie. A huge thank you to Jody Best from Best Bet Promotions for helping set that one up. And a huge thank you to Frank for calling in.
Of course.
All right, so this next guest is someone else that was a big honor for us to have on this podcast a couple times. And again, coming soon. Damon Johnson was the vocalist and guitarist, one of the 2 guitarists for Brother Kane back during the 90s. And they toured with Van Halen whenever they were on their second album, Seeds. And it would have been whenever Van Halen was promoting Balance, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Damon Johnson, of course, since then has been in part of the supergroup Slave to the System. He was Alice Cooper's guitarist for a while. He's been in Thin Lizzy now for, I believe, over a decade. He was also a big part of Black Star Riders for their first several albums. He was in Whiskey Falls, and then I'm sure I'm forgetting something, but he's also now, he's had solo albums throughout the years, but now he's got a new album coming out with his band Damon Johnson and the Get Ready. And we talk about all that stuff on an interview that we actually recorded with him the week before,
right,
or just a few days before Eddie passed. And then he was gracious enough to call back and talk about Eddie here for a bit. And then, like I said, we've got this new episode with him coming here in the next couple weeks, so be on the lookout for that as well. He's also been on episode 170 with Ricky Warwick of the Black Star Riders, and then he was on episode 216, of course, by himself, and of course, like I said, the one coming up. So let's just jump into this. Here's Damon Johnson.
It was incredible to just kind of immerse all of us, man. The whole world was just immersing itself in Ed and all his specialness. We've had him for so long, I think certainly it's easy to take it for granted after a while, but so many stories, guys like you and me, we already knew.
Yeah.
But just amazing, man, here, read the comments from other people and other artists that, respected him and had some interaction with him. And to get to tell some of my own stories, man, I feel really lucky that, we were able to tour with those guys and kind of, have a pretty incredible experience, man, just to be around them on a day-to-day basis and strike up some level of a friendship. So I'm grateful for that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of like you said, it's cool to see not just obviously people love the music, but to see all the stories coming out from musicians about like how good of a person he was to them, like whether it be just giving them gear or just, reaching out to them and that kind of thing.
Well, I only thought about this yesterday, and you're the first person I've said this to, but man, it's impossible for someone that smiled as often as he did for that to be manufactured or fake.
Yeah.
Or like a shtick, you know what I mean? Like that's really and truly who he was. And I don't know if you read Ted Tippelman's book that came out earlier in the year.
I haven't yet. I've read some excerpts from it. Yeah.
Incredible, man. Incredible. And for all the amazing artists that Ted had already produced when he first crossed paths with Van Halen, he said Eddie was fully contained right out of the gate, still basically, maybe he was 19 or 20. I can't remember how young he was when they signed to Warner Brothers. I guess it was 76 is when they signed the deal, early 77. But he was fully formed and unaffected, no rock star ego, no big trip about, hey, look at what I can do. It makes me special. He just loved it and had a focus and a purpose and just loved playing with his brother. And, just incredible, man, that a guy with that headspace would literally change the world.
Yeah. Well, what are your earliest memories as far as hearing? Was it that first album or?
Yeah, man, I have this amazing story, Trent, that I've shared with a couple people last week in a couple interviews, but it's worth retelling. My very first garage band was my buddies from junior high school. So we were all 14. And my drummer's dad had a buddy that ran like a little ice cream parlor kind of place. And so they set it up, man, for us to be able to play at this ice cream parlor, like 7:00 on a Saturday night, something like that. So we were a 4-piece band, 2 guitars, bass, and drums, and we're playing, Sweet Home Alabama and China Grove by the Doobie Brothers and Cat Scratch Fever and like a Bad Company song, a Foghat song. That's about all we knew. So we played this gig, and there was a guy who I think was maybe in college that came down and brought a little PA system that we were able to play through. So when the gig was over, we're helping this guy load his PA into the back of his Chevy van. And this is one of those, I forget the name of it, just the Econoline vans, but it had the plush carpeting and the captain seat, in the second seat area.
Yeah.
And, just classic mid-70s van. And so, man, we put the stuff in the back, and he goes, hey, man, have you guys heard of Van Halen? And we went, no, never heard of Van Halen. And he goes, check this out. And I remember the vantage point I had standing at the back door of the van looking up to the front of the van, and he took, an 8-track tape and slid it into his tape deck. And the first thing we heard was Running with the Devil. And then that segued into Eruption. And our jaws were on the floor. just immediately on the floor. And I remember my buddy Troy and I looking at each other and literally saying, what is that? How many guitar players are in that band? And this guy knew, this dude, Paul was his name. He goes, oh, that's just one guy, Eddie Van Halen. And then he pulls the tape out, and then we were able to see that album cover, with the 4 photos of the 4 guys. And my buddy Troy goes, wow, man, that music sounds just like that picture looks. Like that, those pictures are badass. And it's like a spaceship. It's like a spaceship had landed in the parking lot of this Dairy Queen. So, man, I think I moved shortly after that with my family. We moved to North Alabama. So I just remember buying that first record right when we moved up there. Because, I didn't have any money. If I wanted to buy a record, I had to save for like 2 or 3 weeks. So As soon as I saved up enough money, man, I bought that record. And, I was just obsessed after that. Everybody in high school just knew me as the Van Halen guy. I had a bumper sticker on my car, blasting it, and I played in the marching band, all that stuff. Van Halen, dude, all the time. And then I put another band together up there, and of course, it was hard to play that stuff. I wasn't technically proficient enough yet to really cover it, but I know we played You Really Got Me and Talking About Love. And, as I got to be more skilled with my technique, I would tackle some of the other stuff. But he changed my life, man. He changed my life before I ever even saw them. And then once I saw them live in concert, it was the Women and Children First Tour, 1980. It was over for me, dude. It's easy to throw around these cliches, Trent. So forgive me if I sound like so many other people. It changed my life. It just changed my life. The energy, the show, Dave, Michael's harmonies, the light show, the way the amps look, Eddie just shoving it down our throats. It was almost abusive. It was like we got hit in the face with a Mack truck. And listen, man, I just, for all of the different genres that I've delved into in my career as a songwriter and as a band member, I like all kinds of music, man. But there's no question that the essence of the sound and the style of music that is just tattooed on my inner musical heart is hard rock. And, it's all because of Ed. It's like the stuff that moved me during that period of time was specifically the bands that had power and, tempo and energy. And so, roll the clock forward, you can imagine what a thrill it was for me and the guys in Brother Kane to get to do some dates with Van Halen in 1995. And, I got to tell him some of this stuff to his face. So it was incredible.
Yeah, we've talked to, quite a few people that have, been around for 30, 40 years in the business, and you're the first person I've talked to that's actually played shows with Van Halen. So, like, besides just that being a great experience, like, what did you pick up, like, from seeing him live every night that you still take with you to this day?
Well, that was a unique period of time for Eddie because Eddie was sober. And, we all know that Eddie has struggled through his life with alcohol, and he was completely sober that entire tour. And it was hard for him. And he shared that with me. He would talk about how it's frustrating to go back to the hotel or get on the plane, and the other guys are still drinking, as you do. End of the show, you crack a beer, you have a cocktail, and he goes, "Man, it's torture for me. It's hard." And I felt so humbled, that he would share that with me, and I totally understand. Anybody could understand. But I have another great story to tell you, man. That on that tour, early on, their tour manager introduced me to Ed, and he was an angel, bro, right out of the gate, just so welcoming. And I told him, I said, "Look, I'm a super fan. I'm going to get on your nerves." He said, "Damon, you've earned your spot on this tour, man. You ask me anything you want, whenever you want." And so one day he comes by my dressing room and says, "Hey, man, you want to go check out the rig? His guitar rig." And I was like, "Yes, let's go." So this was right at the time that he was fully launched, advertising, promoting, pushing his PV 5150 amplifiers, one of which he sent me at the end of the tour, by the way. And, it was in all the magazines, and it was just all he was focused on, man, was these 5150 amps. So he takes me up there, and he let me play his guitar and blast a couple chords, and it was just, insane, man. It's so loud. And I was like, yeah. So we walk around the back of the rig, and he's showing me all these heads in these amp racks, Trent. And, man, there's like 8 of these amps, all wired up, all turned on, just mad. That's, he's getting this mammoth sound and, a switching system. And I'm sure he had some amps for some songs, and he would switch to the other ones for other songs. Well, man, there was one beat up road case sitting next to these racks of the new amps, this older rack. And down at the bottom was this beat to hell Marshall head. it didn't even have the full Marshall logo on it anymore, maybe just 2 or 3 letters. Cigarette burns, all this stuff. And probably, as I know, he had this Marshall amp that was like legendary that Jose Arellano modded for him, and it was on that was his tone, dude, those first 6 records.
Yeah.
So I looked at that amp, I looked up at Ed, I looked back down at the amp, and I looked up at him, and he put his finger up to his mouth, and he goes, shh, like, don't tell anybody, that's our little secret.
Wow.
So even with all those, all these PV amps, dude, he still had that Marshall head. And, man, this was before cell phones and iPhones, and oh my God, I would have killed to have had a photo of that. I was so conscientious about not being, a nerd that it really there's no way I would have taken a camera up there. But, oh, Ed, can I take some pictures? That would have not been cool. So I didn't do it. But man, I wish I had one. Special.
Well, with that, that whole experience, all that being pretty early in your career, like, do you remember when you guys got the word that, they wanted you to open up some shows, like what that feeling was like, or like how giddy you were or anything?
Oh, totally, man. It was incredible. We were on the road somewhere, and I got a message from our tour manager, sound man. He said, hey, man, you need to call the office. So we stopped to get gas somewhere. And so I go over to the payphone, and I call, and my manager, Conrad, he says, hey, buddy, I got some good news. Collective Soul had to pull out of a date, and the promoter wants to put you on the bill. And I said, great, what show? He says, it's opening for Van Halen in Dayton, Ohio. I might have dropped the phone. If I could really imagine my immediate reaction, I bet I dropped the phone and, ran back to our beat up bus to tell the guys. But so we did that one-off, and I'm sure all, our agent and our management and everybody's trying to get more dates. And so sure enough, man, after that one-off, then we got to do the entire, the third leg of that tour in North America. And that added up to about 20 shows. And we couldn't have been happier, man. And, this was at the time that, grunge and the Seattle bands, were just crushing it. And that was the focus of rock music, new music at that time. But, we had passed up some other tours with some heritage bands or classic bands because we were trying to do our best to maintain some level of relevance, in the current climate. But man, there was no way we were going to pass at that. Anybody would have jumped at that. They would have been foolish not to. So, we were honored, man. Honored, thrilled. It's like a dream come true.
Yeah, I think you can't really say that any Van Halen's really underrated. Everybody knows about all of it, but that Balance album just doesn't get the accolades it deserves, I think.
Yeah, there was a couple great songs on there, man. Even the slower stuff, the radio hits were good. Can't Stop Loving You, they just had so many great songs with Sammy, as far as radio hits and stuff like that. But then, as we know, that tour ended, and that's when they had their falling out. So, it's all fascinating, man. But obviously, their legend was secure, and their ability to sell out everywhere they played was still very intact. So, and like so many other people, man, you found out about his cancer, and he kind of got past the first scare with it, and we were all happy that he recovered, and then the word got around that it had kind of returned, and it was more like full-blown throat cancer as opposed to the tongue cancer he had in the beginning. And let's be honest, Trent, that guy, he never took a photo that he didn't have a cigarette in his hand.
Right.
So it didn't take a rocket scientist to tell that was going to come back and cause him some problems with his health one day, and it damn sure did. And I hate that, man. I hate it for him. I hate it for his family, and I hate it for all the rest of us. But he talks about that too, man. Nicotine, there's nothing harder to kick than that. Nothing. So
yeah,
it's but I'm certainly glad he lived, and I'm grateful for what he's given to me and the path he set me on. And I still don't know how I was able to come from such rural beginnings to be able to be a full-time musician at all, much less, get to do the things that I've been able to experience in the last 30 years, man. So, but he was the guiding force. He was the thing, and it's just extra special, that he was this innovator. Ted Templeman said it himself. He said, Ed is like in this hierarchy of great American artists of all time that is very small group. For instance, Charlie Parker, what he did for the saxophone, Art Tatum, what he did for the piano, Eddie Van Halen and the guitar. Totally. He's in that hallowed ground, of innovators, and just changed the world. Changed the world.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't even know if there's anybody still living that is important to rock music besides maybe Paul McCartney.
I think that's a pretty good analogy, man. Had that kind of impact. I mean, I guess in a way, Van Halen was our Beatles.
Yeah.
It had that's the only thing to compare it to that had that kind of seismic shift. How many thousands of bands came out after Van Halen that had, some big-haired, chest out lead singer jumping around like Tarzan, and then a guitar player playing 1,000 notes a minute.
Right.
And hey, some of them were pretty good. Some of those singers were pretty good, and some of those guitar players were pretty good, but none of them could touch Van Halen, man. So, I would always laugh when people would talk to Eddie about that in interviews, and I'm like, hey, man, how does it feel? Are you proud? You were the fathers of the hair bands and the butt rock bands. He'd be like, fuck that, dude. That wasn't my fault. I was trying to write good songs.
Yeah. Right on, man. Well, I think that'll work for what we're doing for this episode. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Of course, Trent. It's always a pleasure, buddy. And thank you guys for doing this episode. And listen, we're going to be celebrating this guy for decades to come. Yes. So it's always my pleasure to talk about him. And thanks for letting me be a part of it, man. Good luck to you guys.
There you go, Damon Johnson. Damon Johnson and the Get Ready, Brother Kane, Thin Lizzy, and a ton more. A huge thank you to Damon for calling back in and talking to us about Eddie there for a bit and all the cool stories he had from touring with Van Halen. And then, of course, just his history growing up as a fan like the rest of us. Huge thank you to Jody Best of Best Bet Promotions for her help with that one as well. All right. Our next guest is a man named Chris Heinlein, and he is in a band called the Midnight Devils and 3D in Your Face. And this is a band that kind of came onto our radar, I would say, 4 or 5 years ago. The first time 3D in Your Face played Rocklahoma. And these guys are full on just like attitude of the 80s spirit and all that great stuff. Amazing original music. And Chris is one of those guys that you can tell when he plays that he's influenced by Van Halen, but he doesn't have, he's not like a ripoff of Van Halen in any way. And of course, when we sat down and talked to him and Sam from 3D in Your Face and the Midnight Devils, he talked about Eddie Van Halen on that first episode we had him on back, which was episode 67. And then they joined us again on episode 135. What do you think whenever seeing this guy live? I mean, this is the type of band that, like, I hope, picks up steam in the coming years. The Midnight Devils or 3D in Your Face, whichever one.
Right.
I know they're focusing more on the Midnight Devils right now.
Mm-hmm.
But Chris Heinlein definitely is a freaking fantastic guitarist that I hope more people need to know about.
Yeah, guitar acrobatics, like I said earlier.
Yeah.
Definitely coming to play with this guy.
Yeah. Well, let's just jump into this. Here's Chris Heinlein talking about Eddie Van Halen.
It's like a three-way tie, but Eddie's just like a touch above everybody else because he really, there's Ace Frehley, who kind of made, you go, oh, and then there's Eddie Van Halen who changed literally everything, literally everything was just, it's like you saw color for the first time. If does that make sense? You're like, everything just kind of clicked,
Right. Well, like, what was the impact to you? Was it real early on that you kind of latched on to him and Van Halen's music, or was it later on, or how did that work for you?
Well, I was a young lad, and I was mowing yards and sweeping out this machine shop to buy a guitar and an amp. And of course, at the time, I wanted to be Ace Frehley, and or be in Kiss. Really, I just wanted to be the guitar player in Kiss. And Van Halen came out, and I'd heard the song "Running with the Devil." I think it was that meow, and you hear thump, 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 and it comes in, and you're like, whoa. And so that was cool. So I went to go buy the record, and I saw the album cover. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. The black and white striped guitar. I'm like, oh, I've never seen nothing like that in my life.
Yeah. And
then when you hear the 90 seconds that changed every guitar player's life, that eruption, and you're like, how does he do that? It's just mind boggling because there's no YouTube, no internet, you had to literally see him live to understand the greatness of Edward Van Halen. And then, you really got me, which was a great Kinks cover, but even better because it was like, on steroids.
Right.
And the beginning of Ain't Talking About Love. And you're just like, it was just literally when you listen to it with headphones, it's mind-boggling, the effects, the guitar, everything. And then, of course, I'm the One, which was the end of the first side. And the guitar parts on that were just like so unbelievable. No one could even come close to that. Just saying he was the greatest doesn't even come close to, explaining the effect and the overall, greatness of Eddie Van Halen. Just no one played like that. No one, at that time, not a soul.
Yeah.
It was just so unbelievable,
Yeah. When you started playing, was it because of that album, or were you already playing because of Ace Frehley at that point?
I was playing guitar roughly, and I wasn't really good. And I had an Explorer copy guitar because I saw Paul Stanley had one. And so immediately when that album came out, I'm like, oh my God, I'm doing this all wrong. I went out and bought a Strat copy and tried to Van Halenize it with a whammy bar and all. He definitely made me think of guitar in a completely different way, in the sense that I wanted to be more fluid, more fast. Of course, I wanted to use my right hand and tap. I definitely had to use a whammy bar. That's the first thing I was like, I got to go buy a Strat with a whammy and get this figured out. And of course, I bought it and tore it apart and destroyed it and painted it 15 different times, put tape on it, and was trying to be Eddie Van Halen, put a Floyd Rose on it, did everything I could possibly do to be Van Halen. Of course, there's only one Eddie, but I tried, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Did you get a chance to see him live early on, or was it later? Or
I did see him really early on the Van Halen 2 tour, and there was a song called Women in Love, which has this friggin' amazing intro that he did. And I was in a small venue in Lincoln. It was like I think it was like a 5,000 seat venue in Lincoln, Nebraska. And he walked across the stage smiling, doing the most intricate friggin' guitar part I had ever seen. And he just smiled that it was effortless. And I was like, are you effing kidding me? He just walked across the stage, looking at the crowd, tapping. It was perfect. And I was just like, I'm getting goosebumps right now. And I'm like, holy shit. This guy is like the god of all guitar players.
Yeah.
And I mean, his solo was unbelievable. He was playing the Bumblebee guitar on that tour, which was a Charvel, which, you know, as many people know, he played that. He got that as a, you know, from the Charvel Guitar Company early on for that album. He didn't play it on the album, but it was in the photographs of the album. And so everybody and their brother wanted that guitar. First the black and white one, then like, oh crap, now he's got a new one, the black and yellow one. And so everybody had to get a Charvel, and then Charvel, boom, overnight, like the guitar company. So of course that's the company I went to, you know, and that's still what I play today. But he was just the way he was on stage, the jump and the smiling, the way he played, like it was so effortless. I had never seen anybody play like that before. As far as when you see like Ted Nugent or H3, they're all, you know, got the grimace face and they're like not moving around. You know, they're just doing their thing, and they're great players in their own right. But you know, they're not Van Halen. And when you just see him, just like he's just, you know, watching paint dry but smiling, playing the guitar because it was so effortless to him. Just such a, you know, a game changer and mind blowing experience to see him live with the original band, you know?
Yeah.
You know, I got to watch the progression of him through the years, you know, and, you know, of course I'm a Van Halen guy, not Van Hagar. I love the DLR albums, the 6-pack, I call them. It's a perfect 6-pack. I love the other Van Halen too, but Eddie was different by then. He had changed, but still, those 6 albums were like the foundation of what I consider to be, you know, Eddie Van Halen guitar. You know, he wasn't really experimenting later on with the new album or with the Hagar era albums, but they're still great songs.
Right.
On XM radio, there's they've dedicated a Van Halen channel right now because he just passed, and I'm hearing songs I haven't heard for a long time under the Hagar era. And I'm like, man, I can't believe, I forgot how great this song was. And I forgot how great this song was.
Yeah.
You know, and they did that ill-fated Greatest Hits album in 96. So they had 3 new songs. And I'm like, man, I forgot how great them songs were. You know, it's
right.
You can't even, it's just, you know, yeah, I'm crushed. There's no doubt about it. He was a big, huge, giant influence on me. And I'm definitely crushed and gutted, and I don't really. You're the first person I've really talked to about it, because my bandmate Sam and Jimmy, you know, not to even say anything to me. I'm just like, I'm mourning. Don't say anything, you know. So, you know, but they have reached out to me, just left a message and said, "Oh, sorry, buddy. I know how much you meant to him." I'm like, yeah, you know.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, buddy. Well, sorry.
I know. I was just gonna say, is there anything like that he does, or no, that you do, like to this day, like in your playing, that you think you owe completely to what you might have learned from listening to him?
Oh yeah. I think every player, whether they admit it or not,
yeah,
owe something to EVH. I would say one of the. I have a real weird picking style because of EVH. I like the way I speed pick, tremolo pick, whatever you want to call it. It's not like how EVH does it, but I credit him with it because I couldn't do it like he did. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
He did a flip of the wrist thing. I'm like, holy shit, how the hell do you do that? I couldn't do that, you know?
Yeah.
Also my tremolo, the Floyd Rose, I owe a lot to him. I'd say the way I approach how I use the whammy bar, I owe to Ed. The way I have my guitars built, I owe to Ed. The amp I use, Ed. You know, it's not like I'm not a clone of his. I do different stuff, and obviously no one could be him. But you know, he put the plot, he put the schematic down. and I just kind of followed it and kind of did my own thing with it. You know what I mean?
Right.
So he made all the cool guitars cool. You know, he said, well, this is how I do it, and everybody copied him, but they couldn't play like him. Like, he had his action high, and I have mine low, and he likes Strat style guitars, and I like star bodies. But basically, the Floyd Rose setup, the one humbucker pickup, the maple unfinished necks, I totally stole that all from Ed, you know?
Yeah.
Literally. Like, that's how he did it. That's how I do it, you know? And we definitely owe all something to Eddie, period, you know?
Yeah.
Even the greats owe something to Ed, because he definitely did something that made every guitar player just look at him and go, holy cow, you know?
Yeah, I just read a story here just a couple hours ago that where Steve Vai had said, I don't know if it was yesterday or today, where he had said that when he, joined David Lee Roth's band, he didn't try to mimic anything that Eddie had done because he said it couldn't be done, so there was no point in it. And, that's pretty big coming from someone like Steve Vai that's like regarded as highly as Eddie was,
I read that same story where he said you'd be a fool to try to copy him. Yeah, that's. Steve Vai also said something along the lines of Eddie Van Halen made the unconventional conventional. He made what he was doing like the norm,
right,
because he was doing it. Everybody copied him, And I'm like, yeah, people like somebody as big as Vi or Satriani or whoever to say, oh man, Eddie, I mean, it's literally, he's the godfather of, shred guitar, period. There's no ifs, ands, or buts,
Right.
It's weird to me when somebody who's in a band or, we do many multi-band things, and it's weird to me when someone in the band goes, oh, I don't really listen to Van Halen. I don't really like Van Halen. I just look at them like, what? How can that even possibly be? But there are people out there,
There you go, Chris Heinlein of the Midnight Devils in 3D in Your Face. Once concerts are back in full swing in the coming year or two, do yourself a big favor and check out the Midnight Devils if they come to your area. It's a great freaking time, I promise you that. Thanks to Chris for calling in and sharing his thoughts and his love for Eddie. And like I mentioned earlier, episode 67 and episode 135 both have Chris, along with Sam Morris, who's also the bass player and vocalist of the Midnight Devils. So check that out. All right, next up, we've got a man that I think there's a small group of people in this world that could sit down in a room with Eddie Van Halen and play at the same level. And Mitch Perry is one of those people, I think.
Right.
Mitch Perry is a phenomenal guitarist who has been around for almost as long as, Eddie Van Halen on the professional side of things. I believe his first album that he was part of was maybe 80, 81. Mm-hmm. So only a couple years after Eddie.
Gotcha.
But he talks about being someone that was already a great guitarist and already established. He talks about here in a minute even how hearing Eddie Van Halen, changed what he was doing, which is, kind of cool to hear from someone in his position. Mitch Perry, of course, is part of Talus with Billy Sheehan. He was a part of Steeler. He was a part of the Macaulay Schenker group for a bit.
Right. He
was Cher's guitarist for a while. He's been the guitarist for The Sweet for a while now. And he's done a plethora of other things. And he has a band called the Mitch Perry Group who put out their debut album this year, just a couple months ago, called Music Box. And I promise you, this thing is killer. I listened to this like 3 times last week alone.
Yeah.
If you love your classic rock, your Stones, all that kind of stuff, you're going to love this thing. So check out Music Box if you have not. But Mitch Perry was on episode 261 earlier this year, and he will be on a new episode coming soon here in the next few weeks, because we talked to him, at the same time that we did this Eddie Van Halen thing. We also did another interview with him for the podcast. So let's hear what Mitch Perry has to say about Eddie Van Halen.
You guys kind of came up at the same time, and you were already playing by the time, he was on the scene. Did he, after you heard his music for the first time, did he have any effect on you, in influence in any way?
I mean,
Yeah, I don't think there's anyone on this planet who heard Van Halen who wasn't immediately. I mean, I am not going to say you were driven to go out and play like him, but I'm sure that anyone who heard that for the first time who had an interest in guitar, even if they were, playing nothing but the blues, had to go, what the heck did that guy just do there? I mean, it was from another planet. So, of course it did. What's really funny is I played right at the very beginning, like one of my first professional gigs. My first real band was the Kids, but I did a couple of gigs with other bands. And the drummer in one of those bands was also a guitar player. He actually plays with, who is that guy? David Allen Coe.
Okay.
But he showed me that tapping trick like way back in 1975 or 76. Now, when Van Halen came out, it wasn't, until 78 that we heard that. And remember, we didn't have the benefit of YouTube. We didn't have the benefit of MTV even. Unless you were going to a Van Halen concert, you had no idea what he was doing on that guitar.
Yeah.
And it was really funny because when I first saw that trick from my friend in the previous band I was talking about, I immediately tried to play it, and you tried to do it and fumbled over it and went, that's a lot of work for nothing, and put it away. But it never left my memory. And when I'm trying to pick out Eruption, I put two and two together, because I figured the third triad that Eddie plays in Eruption, you can't really figure that out, how to play it on guitar without tapping. And I put the two and two together. So it obviously affected my playing. I mean, I started tapping, and, even though Van Halen was the reason, not everybody had seen Van Halen do that. So, that kind of, I totally got it because of Eddie. And I did it a lot when I first started playing, until Pat Thrall took an interest in my playing. And one thing he said to me, he goes, man, you do that great, but you should stop, because you're going to sound like every other guitar player. He goes, when you get to LA, you'll see what I mean. This was just before I came out here to play with Alfonso Johnson, which Pat had hooked me up that gig. And he was right. I mean, you had a world of incredibly good guitar players, and who'd all been getting schooled on that stuff. But, I kind of laid off of it again until I wound up joining Talus. And there was no way I could look across the stage at the amazing stuff Billy was playing and keep from tapping my own neck.
Right. Earlier in the 2000s, you did that little guitars cover for that tribute album. Like, how did you approach that, as far as, like, not, so you still sound like Mitch Perry, kind of like we talked about earlier with Jumpin' Jack Flash?
Yeah, you know what? I didn't really approach it that way. I just tried to do a good representation of it. I mean, this is it. I did that song. Because, I was asked to, and it was paying, homage to one of my heroes, and I was playing with some great players on it. But if you had asked me to cover a tune, would I have ever picked that? And I would have said no. And you would have said, well, why? And I would have said, what the hell am I going to do to this song to make it better?
Yeah.
I mean, the smart generals don't fight battles that they're not going to win. So, that would be something that I would have never covered. But in this context, doing it for a tribute album where most of the guys on the record were basically trying to go and honor the sound and the style of Eddie, I did my best at trying to do that. Of course, I got to do it, as you said, on little guitars. So that was a challenge, but I'm pretty proud of what we did.
Yeah. Throughout your career, did you ever play any shows with with Van Halen, or at least see him live as a fan?
I saw them, a number of times. I never played on the same bill with them, but I did see them a number of times, and like I said, I was not I wouldn't say, I couldn't say I was a friend of Eddie's, but I've been fortunate enough to meet him and get to talk to him a couple times. So, I tell you, it's been over a week, and I'm still, that everything seems a little flat, whatever your opinion of music, I mean, the guy is undeniably the most influential guitar player, and for me, I mean, I just think what he created was mind-boggling and amazing, and in the retrospect, of thinking about it this last week, I'm more blown away now than I was a week ago.
Yeah.
He was really something special.
Yeah, it's been really cool to see all, musicians across the board, just talking about stories of, whether it be them, their interactions with him or just their favorite music, that kind of thing.
Yeah, no, and it really has. There have been some really neat things, and just going back and revisiting, some of the old recordings, like I listened to those demos that Gene Simmons did with the band in 1976, and listened to a live concert from Fresno in 1978, and it's just mind-blowing how those guys knew what they were doing and knew where they were going and had their sound way back then. Eddie was taking that guitar to another place so long before any of us even had a clue.
There you go, Mitch Perry of the Mitch Perry Group, Talus, Cher, The Sweet, and a long list of other amazing accomplishments. Or he's Lita Ford as well for a while, right?
Yeah, he was, yeah.
So check out the Mitch Perry Group's new album. And like I said, he was on episode 261. And also a huge thank you to him and to Jody Best of Best Bet Promotions for help setting that one up. All right, coming up next, this is cool because if you had told me back in 1991 that 29 years from now we would be talking to the vocalist for Slaughter about the guitarist for Van Halen on a program, because podcast wasn't even a thing back then,
right,
that me and you hosted, I'd be like, oh, okay, that sounds completely unrealistic, but here we are.
Here we are.
We're talking about Eddie Van Halen and Mark Slaughter, which, another thing to point out, we've talked about it before, and you'll hear Eddie Trunk and other people talk about it. Everybody knows Mark Slaughter and what he can do when he sings for freaking Slaughter. The guy's got a voice. He's still got it to this day. Mm-hmm. Also, of course, with Vinnie Vincent Invasion before Slaughter and his solo work now. Mm-hmm. But what a lot of your average fans don't realize is that this guy's not just a guitarist. He's also a great guitarist. He's like a trained guitarist. He's classically trained guitarist.
Hell of a player, man.
Yeah. I think he even didn't he do Eddie Trunk's
the intro,
podcast intro or something.
Podcast intro, and he played. He played dates with Nelson. Remember?
Oh, that's right. I forgot about that.
He played lead guitar for Nelson.
Yeah, I completely forgot about that.
Right? Yeah.
Well, Mark Slaughter was on this podcast back on episode 217 earlier in 2019. We talked with him not long before they played Rocklahoma in 2019.
Yeah.
Which was the last time we got a chance to see Slaughter. And, man, not just him. He's also got Blando in that group and Tim Kelly. They're fantastic guitarists. He talks about them as well in here. So let's hear what Mark Slaughter has to say about EVH.
Even though you're known as a singer, you're also a great guitarist. What kind of impact did Eddie have on you early on?
The first time I heard, I was growing up playing guitar, and I have a background in jazz guitar. And the teacher that I had was one of the top guys on the Strip, Jimmy Kay, and also Alex Domshot, which are big jazz guys in the Las Vegas community. And I remember getting the Van Halen record, and I took the Van Halen record to these guys, and I said, I need to play like this guy. And when I first heard the Van Halen 1 record, and they were like, I don't know how he's doing it. Like, because nobody were really, doing the tapping thing. And in jazz, it's a different mindset, too, that it's 4 fingers, 4 frets. So it's just in a small little area. There was no wide stretches in jazz. It's all pretty much right there within a tight box. That's the style of doing it. So when I first heard that record, it changed my whole world as a guitar player. And then, I said this before, without, Van Halen kicking the door open in Southern California for all these bands during a new wave time, it was all new wave on the radio, and Van Halen kicked the front door open for all of us. And we wouldn't have had the success if it wasn't for those guys doing what they did, because it really opened the whole, let all the cattle in. Here we go,
Right.
So not only did it influence me, but without that, I wouldn't have the career that I have. Period.
Yeah. When you look at, your music you've been involved with, whether it be with Slaughter, with Tim Kelly, or Jeff Blando, or before with Vinnie Vincent, like, what do you hear and stuff you've been a part of that, you think's directly influenced by Eddie and the playing style?
Oh, I can tell you right now, when I wrote the Wildlife riff, Dan and I were writing it, and it was very much in the style of how Eddie plays. Eddie, I say this all the time, Eddie is as good of a rhythm player as he was a lead player. His rhythm, what him and Alex did, and Alex is a very, very underrated drummer. What a phenomenal drummer he is.
Yeah.
And with Eddie and him, they played as one brain. I mean, they really, because they grew up together and they were brothers, they played so well together. Well, when I wrote The Wildlife, it was, basically, if you're ever sitting down as a guitar player learning it, it's very Van Halen-y, and the riffs and the rhythm in between is not your standard just chug, chug, chug. There's a lot of that influence of Van Halen, especially in that track, of more than any of them. That's the one. And Tim was like, you're an ass to, I hate this song, like when we first started, because he thought I just wrote it just to mess with him. And he was pissed off because you just wrote that because you're trying to make it hard. I don't do that way. Because he was Schenker, Steve Lukather, all great players, but, that was his influence. But mine was in the Van Halen, Larry Carlton, so it's jazz and Van Halen. So that's where I came from.
Gotcha.
But he ended up telling me later, and, as we were touring, I hated that song when we first started it because it's my favorite song to play live.
That's great.
That was Tim's favorite because he climbed that mountain, so to speak.
That's great. Did you, throughout your career, did you ever play any shows with Van Halen?
Never played shows with him. I ran into Eddie at the Bill and Ted party. It was Gene Simmons and Paul and Shannon, Dana, myself, and ran into Eddie. And I met him there. He's very, very kind. Look, he's not only is he a great player, but I think he, inspired a lot of guitar players to not be scared to Frankenstein out a guitar and look for better tone and look for, something that's going to add something to your sound. And, I've got probably about 10 guitars that I've put together in the barn, and again, it's that Eddie Van Halen mentality of like, who cares? Just put it together, make it work, man. Your hands.
Yeah.
So you find things that add different tonalities for different things in different songs or tracking. That's how I look at it. So I've got all these guitars that are Strats and Tellies and, these, crazy guitars that, look, you wouldn't buy them in the shop, but they work great for me,
Right. Yeah. On that Little Guitars compilation tribute that came out like in early 2000s, you recorded I'm the One with Doug Aldrich. Like, have you ever like performed other Van Halen songs throughout your career?
Yeah, we've done, Ain't Talking About Love, the standard, stuff, Running with the Devil, we've done. In fact, I'm driving as we speak. I'm driving in the mountains of Tennessee, head down to through Alabama to play a show in Mississippi. So we have one show at a state fair. It's the first one we've done in 8 months.
Wow.
And it's with the government. It's a state fair, so the government approved it. So we're going to go in there and, with all the restrictions and masks and all the other stuff, it's going to be a little odd, but, I got my EVH guitar that I'm going to, play Fly the Angels on and, send a tribute out to Eddie myself, because it's one of those things, man. We're all blessed to have that guy as a mentor and incredible way of approaching it, which is no fear. Just jump in the pool. Don't test the waters. Just jump in there and do it. And that was a good part of his nature.
Yeah, definitely.
I appreciate you having me on, and thanks for doing that. It's again, it's a somber moment, but at the same time, his life should be celebrated.
Absolutely.
So, that's what we're both doing. It's a good thing. Hopefully somebody listens to this and that side of it and goes, you know what, man, I'm going to pick up a guitar. I'm going to make music and enjoy life. That's really, Van Halen was the party. That's what they really were.
Yeah, the whole, like all eras of it, I think, is just a good time,
It's a good time, and, David was a front man and Tammy was a singer. I mean, I'm not dissing, either one of what they did, but they were both so strong at those two areas. David was such a great front man, and not saying that Sammy's not, but Sammy's a singer. He's known as a singer. So it was a different style of Van Halen, but I appreciate that just as much as their early years,
Yeah.
But, the truth is, of the early years, they were all young and, they were lighting the world on fire, and you hear the party. It's coming off the needle and on that record, just big time. I mean, what great records, man.
There you go, Mark Slaughter, of course, of Slaughter. A huge thank you to him for calling in. As you heard there, he was driving while he called in. He was on his way to, I think he said Mississippi or Alabama for a Slaughter show.
Nice.
Driving down from Nashville. So I appreciate, of course, him taking the time to give us a call there to talk about Eddie Van Halen and some cool stories as well. He had an album come out just here 2 or 3 years ago called Halfway There, which is a great to hear him back on record there, because it had been a while since we, heard something official from Mark Slaughter, because Slaughter hasn't had a new album in quite a while. So hopefully we'll get something along those lines one day. But a huge thank you again to Mark Slaughter. And of course, a huge thank you to Jody Best of Best Bet Promotions for her help with that one as well.
Definitely.
All right, next up, we've got CJ McClellan, who I mentioned earlier. CJ McClellan is the guitarist for the band Grind. They're based here in Oklahoma. And he's been on this podcast now four times.
Yeah.
4 times. Let's see here. Way back at episode 41, he was on with Dale Diver, who is the vocalist and also rhythm guitarist for Grind. As well as episode 134, CJ was on with Dale again. And then episode 161, CJ joined us for our Kiss every album in a row. Like I mentioned earlier with Van Halen, we did that on Kiss, and CJ joined us because he's a massive fan of Kiss as well. And in episode 181, CJ was on here with Paulette from Fist of Rage, talking about the We Are Tulsa music tribute. So check out any of those episodes. They're all fun. CJ's always got great stories. Good to talk to. He's become a good friend of not just this podcast, but us both personally.
Of course.
Over the past couple years.
Yes, yes.
And we had to have him on here because I know that he's a massive fan of Eddie Van Halen, as any guitarist should be. So let's check out what CJ McClellan has to say.
Dale works for a guy, a company that one of the owners there is like he's actually, both of them actually, there's two kids there that are incredibly accomplished musicians, one of which has gone on tour with Michael McDonald, and it's like, he's really very, very talented. Anyway, Wednesday, we're going to like meet in like this undisclosed location in this hidden fucking warehouse somewhere. And it's going to be all these guitar players and drummers and bass players. We're going to get together and play all these Van Halen songs.
Wow.
I can't even wait, dude. I'm like a kid, like waiting for Christmas, man. I'm like so freaking excited about this.
Is this just a thing for fun? Or are you guys like doing something with it, recording it or something?
No, I think this is more just for the celebration of Ed. You know, we're all huge Ed Van Halen geeks. And so this is kind of just us getting together and getting to play songs that honestly our bands would never play, you know, but we all love the music, and it's just a way for us to kind of come together and honor him and enjoy that moment together with people that loved him. You know, so I'm like ridiculously excited about doing this.
Man, that's cool.
So like yesterday, I spent literally like 8 hours with a guitar in my hand, like with YouTube on, and I was watching football, college football and all that crap. But, you know, at the same time, I've got a guitar in my hand and I'm brushing up on all these old Van Halen songs, trying to really remember, like, I used to know this shit, you know? It's like, it's not just something you just pick up. You actually got to like work at some of those things. So
yeah, I mean, speaking of that, like, so where did your love for Van Halen start? Was it at a pretty young age, or was it after you were already playing guitar?
I'd say probably around 7th grade is when I first kind of really came into Van Halen, like on my radar. It was right before the 1984 record came out, Diver Down, all that stuff was still kind of out there. And my uncle had kind of introduced me to Van Halen, but the 84 record hit, and like that was just such a game changer. It pushed them to the forefront of everything, because you had this just enormous band that had all this energy, like we're going to take over the world, and they had this pop influence, and so you kind of mix the pop radio with this just tremendous just energy, and you know it was just it really caught everyone's attention in that era. So probably about 7th grade is when I really, really became a Van Halen fan. And then from there, you know, I kind of worked backwards, kind of learned about some of the stuff earlier. Because, like, when the first record came out in 78, I was only like 7 years old. So
okay,
I was probably more into Kiss at that point, because they had action figures and things like that. But,
right,
you know, so it wasn't until about 84 that I really kind of picked up on Van Halen and was like, holy shit, what is this? And, you know, it was just, everything in that band was just so over the top. It just, I just long for bands like that, you know? I mean, the closest thing we have nowadays to anything like Van Halen is Steel Panther.
right.
I mean, to be honest. And they're just a carbon copy, you know, they're nothing like that. But can you imagine 1980, 82 seeing a band that comes out and basically just is like, we're here to fuck shit up. We're going to steal your girlfriend. We're going to make you wish you were us. And by the time we leave here, everyone's going to be like, holy shit, what did I just see? That was Van Halen from 80 to 84.
Yeah.
It was otherworldly.
But were you already playing guitar by that point in 7th grade?
I had just started.
Okay.
And I got hooked up with a friend of mine who was a good guitar player. And, back then when you're just starting guitar, you just hang out with people and they're like, oh, that's cool. You can play this Judas Priest riff, or you can play this Motley Crue riff, or you can play this Van Halen riff. That's really awesome. And, so back then, that's kind of what it was about. And that's kind of what makes me excited about this get together this coming week is it's almost going to be like back in the day when we'd go to people's houses and we'd just play riffs and be like, well, this is how I think it goes. And then the other guy would play it and you'd be like, no, that sounds way, way cooler than what I'm doing. How are you doing that? I really kind of think Wednesday when we get together, it's going to be a lot of that, kind of just sharing our takes on these Van Halen songs. I think it's just going to be really pretty damn cool.
Yeah. Is there anything like in your playing now that you think, obviously Eddie is like responsible for a ton of stuff that people all over the board do, but is there anything you think specifically that you do playing wise that is directly influenced by him?
Absolutely. The shadow that Eddie Van Halen casts is far and wide, but any hot scorching day, it feels greater in the shade.
Right.
So it's way cooler in his shade that he's cast. And the fact of the matter is there's not a guitar player in rock and roll right now that has not in some way been influenced by Eddie Van Halen. He set the world on fire in 1976 when they first came out. And then when the world got to know him in 78, 79, 80, he completely changed the genre. He's the Jimi Hendrix of our generation. And so when I look at my playing, if I'm going to, kind of try to break down, well, where do I see his influence in what I do? It's the quest for that articulation, the clean tone where you can hear every note ring out. I'm not always, the stuff we do, I'm not trying to shred like he did. I like playing that stuff privately, but it doesn't always fit what we're doing in grind. But just the clean tone, the articulation where you can hear every note ring out is something that I think I've adopted and definitely have been influenced by him heavily. And then the other thing is just, people celebrate the shred part of what he does, the pyrotechnics of his lead playing, but the phrasing, just the note choices he picked were just so odd at times. The phrasing was so unusual. It's just something that I've always tried to take away, is to try to pick a note or two that just doesn't seem like it would typically go there. So those are the two things I think when I would analyze what I do versus his influence on me, that I think I try to carry forward. But there's not a rock and roll guitar player today, even the greats. Steve Vai would tell you Eddie Van Halen was his greatest guitar player. Nuno Bettencourt would tell you Eddie Van Halen was probably one of his biggest influences. There's not a great guitar player today that will not cite Eddie Van Halen.
Right.
He's permeated all of rock and roll.
Yep.
With that impish grin, like I'm the baddest motherfucker on the planet. He knew it, and it was awesome. It was awesome to behold.
Absolutely. Did you ever get a chance to see him live?
Yeah, I got to see those guys on the Monsters of Rock tour in, I think it was 88, 89, when they toured the state. They did like a stadium tour around the nation with Kingdom Come, Dawkins, Metallica, the Scorpions, and Van Halen as the headliner. I got to see that tour. They toured in Little Rock, Arkansas in 84, but I don't know. I was probably grounded. Some dumb shit that I did. So I didn't get to see him in 84 with David Lee Roth, but I got to see David Lee Roth many other times when he was on the Eat 'em and Smile and all that stuff, the Skyscraper tours. But I got to see Van Halen close to their prime in 88, 89 era.
Very cool.
So they definitely were just a powerhouse band, even as they transitioned into the Sammy Hagar era.
Yeah. What's your favorite riff of or song of Eddie's?
Oh man, good Lord, that's just not even fair to ask. The guy was so proficient. My favorite record, I mean, the Van Halen the Van Halen 1 record was so iconic. There's not a bad song on it. It's hard not to pick that one, but I really have always been drawn to Fair Warning, just because there's just a meanness and this ballsy attitude and swagger to that record. So songs like Dirty Movies and So This Is Love would probably be ones that I would immediately call out and be like, those songs just always really stuck with me. Unchained. They just had such a swagger to them.
Mean Street.
So I probably, there's so many records. Yeah, you got Mean Streets, you got Dirty Streets, Hear About It Later, Unchained, So This Is Love. That record's just full of just these songs that are like, fuck you, man, we're going to take your girlfriend backstage and you're going to wish you were us, and it just, that persona and that swagger really personified what the early Van Halen was all about for me. Because, as David Lee Roth said, the David Lee Roth era was Ain't Talking About Love, right?
Yeah.
You got to bleed for it, baby. And then the Sammy Hagar era was, why can't this be love? It was just completely different takes, but you had this incredible backing band, and you had the maestro, Mr. Eddie Van Halen, really kind of being the thread that kept it all together.
There you go, C.J. McClellan of Grind. A huge thank you to him for calling in and talking about Eddie there for a bit. He's a great guitarist in a great band. Grind is just a pure rock and roll band, so check out their music on Spotify or YouTube, wherever you listen to music. And like I said, he's been on here episode 41, 134, 161, and 181, so dig back through and check out some of those past episodes with CJ as well. All right, now we've got Jim Wilson. This is another one that both Jason and I have been a fan of this guy since we first heard Mother Superior, probably in the late 90s, right?
Right.
Right around the turn of the century, actually, which sounds funny to say, but here we are 20 years later from the turn of the century. So, Jim Wilson was the front man, guitarist, and vocalist for Mother Superior. They had several amazing albums. And when I say amazing, I know I throw that word around a lot, but these albums that band was amazing.
Oh, yeah. They're on fire.
Yeah. That's just a phenomenal band that many people did not know about. Now he's in a band called Motor Sister, which, if you don't know the story behind that, is that Scott Ian is a massive fan of Mother Superior as well, and he wanted to form a group to play Mother Superior songs with Jim Wilson on his birthday. So they did it, and then it turned into a full-time, not a full-time thing, but an actual band. They put out an album called Ride a few years ago, where they re-recorded a bunch of Mother Superior songs, and now they're working on a brand new album that should be out early next year with all original music.
Yeah, which is going to be great. I can't wait for that one.
Yeah, absolutely. That features, besides Scott, Ian, and Jim Wilson, it also features Scott's wife, Pearl Aday, John Tempesta on the drums, and Joey Vera of Armored Saint on the bass. Phenomenal super group right there, and they live up to the hype when you see all those names together. Jim Wilson was also a part of the Rollins Band for a couple albums, which are both fantastic, highly underrated albums as well. And he does a bunch of other stuff. He has solo albums out now, which are both great. He's got an album and an EP, both great. Well, the album is actually still coming. I say that because we actually got a sneak peek of it. So to me, it was kind of out, but it's not. So.
Right.
But anyway, Jim Wilson was on here on episode 179, and then here a few months ago on episode 270. So check both those out, and let's jump into this. Here's Jim Wilson talking about Eddie Van Halen.
Yeah, it's been a wild couple of days. I mean, it's, you know, a lot of celebrating and just some sadness, or just kind of, you know, just seems unreal, you know, because we haven't really known a world much without him. You know what I mean? And just crazy. I dug out all the records, just been listening to everything the past couple of days, you know. The albums are so short, they fly by.
Yeah, I know.
Especially the good ones, you know, because they're just so into it.
Yeah. Yeah, we did, well, it's been a couple years ago now. We do a thing every once in a while where we listen to an artist's catalog in its entirety from start to finish. I mean, on our
Oh, yeah, that's cool.
on our own time, and then we get together and, you know, just discuss how their catalog progressed and everything. And Van Halen was one of those ones where it was just, like you said, it just kind of flew by because there's not really an album I don't like. So.
Right. Yeah, me too. And it just, I think they get better with time too. I mean, you know, it's always been there. And you know, as a guitar player, I think one of the things that I learned from Eddie Van Halen is to not try to play like him. You know, every friend, and you know, when I first came to California, the whole Sunset Strip was all Eddie Van Halen guys, you know, and some were good or whatever, but as soon as you heard it, it was like, okay, you're not him, you know. So it's you know, it's a tough one to have that influence and then try not to ruin it, you know, because he was just, I mean, it's just, his playing was unreal. Like, you know, I've never just every time that I saw him play, I, you know, never expected to have my mind blown, but I always did. You know what I mean? I saw the last show at the Hollywood Bowl, the second show, and I had heard reports that they weren't playing very well, you know, just prior to that on the tour. Maybe when they first got back together, they were quote unquote on fire, but you know, I'd heard from people that, you know, some of the shows were sloppy and whatever, but that show was phenomenal and his guitar solo was incredible. And, you know, it just made me even a bigger David Lee Roth fan. I think because it was the second night they played, I think it was Friday, and then they had off Saturday, and Sunday was the second show, I think. And they'd given a lot for that first one. So the second one was a little more relaxed, which I think helped, you know, them just play better, because it wasn't like we need to impress LA. It was more like a great show.
Yeah.
And I also went to the that Jimmy Kimmel thing where David Lee Roth cut his face with his baton or whatever.
Right.
That was a trip. I mean, because what they showed on TV after obviously was the edited part, but you know, they came out and within the first 30 seconds he was doing that and he cut his face and you could see something was wrong. And it was like, is that blood? There was some camera, you know, some screens set up too. And then he said, oh, I cut my face, I'll be right back. And so he was gone for probably 5 or 6 minutes. And at that moment, Eddie and Alex were kind of jamming blues and just kind of jamming. Eddie was pissed. He kept looking over at the side like, come on, you know. But for a fan, it was like, wow, they're totally rocking. Like, you know, just off the cuff. That's what a great, there's Eddie the Cat. What a great team, though. I mean, not enough gets said about Alex, too. Like, he's just, you know, he's the same way on drums to me and just the greatest.
Yeah. Well, you'd told me before the first time you saw him was on the 5150 tour?
Yeah. I missed the David Lee Roth stuff. So I was 16 and just got a hand-me-down car from my sister. And it was the day of the show. They were playing the Philadelphia Spectrum, and I worked at this place with my buddy Bob, and it was the end of the day, and we're like, should we just drive to Philly and go to see Van Halen? So it was a last-minute decision. Bachman Turner Overdrive opened, and they were a trio at that point, and we didn't expect anything from them, and they were great too. It was still one of the loudest shows that I've ever seen. Wow. And I might get flack for saying this, you know, but I was kind of in between with David Lee Roth. As much as I liked him and as much as I loved those records, I always felt kind of like he was the weak link, you know, and I felt like the melodies, you know, it'd be nice if they had a great singer. And then, you know, Sammy Hagar. And I just thought, well, that's a great combination too, you know. And over the years, you know, of course that changes. Like, of course, I love the David Lee Roth stuff, but, you know, it's a long history with that band, and they went through a lot of changes too. So it was easy to. I have a CD burn of Van Halen 3, but I've probably listened to it once or twice. What's your opinion on that record?
I remember when it came out, and I was kind of indifferent towards it. I didn't dislike it, but like I said, when we did that thing a couple years ago where we listened to all the albums and I listened to it again, like I really dug it. Like back when it came out, I was excited about it because I love Gary Sharon.
I'm today because I haven't. Yeah. No, he's great. He's a great singer too.
Yeah.
It's just, you know.
I mean, I thought it was a good fit because he kind of draws, when you hear his voice, he fits well with both singers, you know.
That's true. Yeah, he's got a Sammy thing for sure.
Yeah.
Also, here's a funny story that happened to me a few years ago. I guess it would have been 2012. I walk a lot and I write songs, and I'm always walking on. I live close to Sunset Boulevard, so I always end up there at some point. And I was walking past the Roxy one morning. It was around 10 o'clock in the morning, and I heard jamming. And I stopped and I said, "It sounds like Van Halen." It wasn't a Van Halen song that I knew. They were just jamming, and my ears was like, wow. And I didn't investigate. I just kept moving. And then it turned out that they were filming the Tattoo video there that whole week, and they would show up at 10 a.m. So I actually heard them jamming from outside, and I obviously it's a pretty recognizable sound, you know, but it was pretty cool when I found that out. I was like, wow, it was Van Halen. And, you know, just walking by in the morning, you don't know if it's, you know, a band playing or if it's, you know, just music coming through, whatever. But, that's where they did that thing. And I guess they would just show up and set up and play. I met him one time with Scott Ian and Pearl. Yeah, that was cool too. We had a rehearsal at Mates in Burbank, and I pulled in, grabbed my amp. I was carrying my Marshall head, and I saw Scott standing in the doorway, and I walked up and I said, "Hey, Scott." He's like, "Oh, this isn't our room. We're over there." And then I noticed that the other guy standing there with him was Eddie in his room, so that was Eddie's room. He was trying out some amps or something. And so when I first saw Van Halen, I just turned and just went straight to the room like, holy shit. I didn't know what to do. And then we rehearsed, and he heard us playing from the outside, and he said, "I gotta come check you guys out." So he came by to visit, and he was super nice. And the one guy in the band said they were just starting to work with David Lee Roth. They were just starting to record a different kind of Truth. And there were all these murmurs in the air, like, you know, they're working on an album together, but nobody was sure. And one of the guys in the band said, "How's it going with the record?" He's like, "I'm done. We're done with the music. We're just waiting for David to write all the lyrics." And he goes, "And let me tell you, this ain't no Bosdy Bop shit." That's an actual quote from Eddie Van Halen.
That's great.
Yeah. And I thought, you know, that was in the first 2 minutes of him being in the room, and I thought, this guy's cool because he's not trying to hide anything. He's funny, and he's not guarded. Like he's not going to tell us some bullshit. He actually said that to us, you know. And we got a quick photo, and it was just whirlwind kind of. But I just remember, they said he just shows up there and tries out amps and stuff. He's been going to Mates for years.
Okay.
But never met Alex. I wish I could meet Alex somewhere, but he seems pretty private.
Yeah. But I was kind of wondering in the last couple of days, do you think we'll ever see Alex on stage again?
Interesting.
Because, I mean, I can't really think of...
I want to say this, too. Everybody talks about Eddie's guitar playing, which they should, but what a songwriter, too. I mean, those songs.
Yeah.
I mean, if he was a great guitar player that couldn't write songs, he'd probably be like a fusion guy or something, you know, like more jazzy. But he just had a handle on rock and roll riffs. I mean, it's incredible.
Yeah.
they didn't invent themselves. I mean, that music is him and his brother, and what a combo.
Yeah.
Man, that's a good question. I've never seen him play with anybody else before.
Yeah. Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking. I can't think of a time where I've seen him do anything else.
I mean, Eddie's jammed with people, and but I don't remember Alex. And maybe he'll go on tour with Wolfie. How about that?
Yeah, that'd be cool. Yeah, and hopefully,
I mean,
hopefully when Wolfie's album, his solo album finally comes out, maybe there'll be some. Maybe you got Eddie on a song or two.
Oh, right, that's true. I've been looking forward to hearing that record. I can't wait to hear what it sounds like. It's done, and we're going to record a bunch of covers at the same time too, just for fun. A bunch of songs that we B-sides and things, and Metal Blade asked us for some extra tunes, so we came up with a fun list of things and spend a couple days singing and doing guitar solos, and then we'll get together and just do a day or two of jamming.
Okay.
We didn't pick a Van Halen one though, but that might change.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess if you picked one, would you want it to be Sammy era, or what do you think?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question. Well, I'm sure I probably would be the only one. And don't get me wrong, I love those records so much. Maybe what it was for me is, as a pop fan, or even say like as much as I was into the Beatles and things when I was a kid, maybe the change from David to Sammy and Eddie's writing just impressed me a little more, that he could even do that he could go from Hot for Teacher to Love Walks In or whatever,
Yeah.
And again, one of the big reasons that I like 5150 is the drums. I mean, I know some of it's electronic stuff too, but he's just, what a pounder, and you can only be brothers and understand each other that well. If I was Eddie Van Halen and my brother wasn't the drummer, you'd have a hard time finding a drummer that could, play some of that stuff, like all those little trick changes they do in, Panama and all those crazy ones, or the song 5150 and Get Up on 5150 is crazy. I mean, just to sit and play air drums is like, how's this guy do this?
Yeah.
So I hope that he, does something.
Yeah.
Here, I got it. He can join Rush.
Yeah.
Just kidding.
Absolutely.
That'd be interesting, though.
Yeah, that's true.
Except he got to write the lyrics.
Right.
There you go. The phenomenal and highly underrated Jim Wilson talking about Eddie Van Halen. A huge thank you to Jim for calling in, talking to me there for a bit about his thoughts on Eddie and Van Halen as a whole. Like I said, check out his EP, Rocker's Delight. Check out Motor Sisters' album, Ride. Check out those Rollins Bands album he was on. Check out all those Mother Superior albums. Check out anything that you see the name Jim Wilson attached to. I promise you, it's fucking great. All right, next up, another name that has been a part of the music scene since the 80s, and that would be Robin McAuley. I believe he's the only person on this list that's not a guitarist, but he's still highly regarded, and he's played with some amazing guitarists.
Yes.
So this man can speak on some Eddie Van Halen. Robin McAuley, of course, is well known as being the vocalist for McAuley Schenker Group. Now, since about 2013, Michael Schenker started the Michael Schenker Fest, where he has brought back all his previous vocalists throughout the years. And Robin McAuley's been a part of that when they tour, and of course on the couple albums they've made. Robin McAuley also now has a band called Black Swan, put out their debut album earlier this year, and I think it's one of the best albums of 2020.
That was a great record.
That album features Reb Beach on guitar, who is another amazing guitarist that Robin talks about here in his talk. He also has been part of Raiding the Rock Vault, which is a real popular show in Vegas, and he talks about how Van Halen plays a part of that. and how important jump is as a part of their program that they do. So let's hear what Robin McCauley has to say about Eddie Van Halen.
What can you say that any words will make sense? Just a tremendous loss with so much music still to give. You know.
Absolutely. Like, I mean, you'd started not, making albums not long after Van Halen came out. Did Eddie or the band have any impact on you at an early point in your career?
Well, of course. I mean, I actually remember back to my Grand Prix days. I remember the guys in Grand Prix would forever be playing Van Halen songs when it first came out, and it was a big deal back in the UK, And I remember Running with the Devil when it came out first. I remember the guitar player had a tough time trying to make out the lyrics that David was singing. He always kept thinking that he would be singing, "My love is for Dio." My love is for Dio.
Yeah.
I remember it was a laughing point, was because we're going, what is he saying? And that kind of, it became a sort of a catchphrase in the band. Whenever we couldn't think of a lyric for a song, we go, "My love is for Dio." And I went, so Dio was a big part of the Van Halen lyrics for us in the beginning. As a singer, I always remember, even to this day, thinking to myself, oh my God, not least the fact that, I worked with Michael Schenker for many years, but who himself is a highly revered guitar player. But I used to think, Eddie coming up with those riffs as a singer, what would I do? I wouldn't have a clue. It must have been so intimidating. And yet they turned out some of the most iconic, memorable songs from that era that continue to shine and just stand out all by themselves today. So it just shows you the wealth of the man's talent. And of course, reading more and more recently of how great a keyboard player he was,
Yeah.
And I actually sent Jody a link that I hadn't actually seen before, from about 5 years ago, where he's talking about his rock and roll or reinventing. And he was doing an interview, and he really got into how his father and mother, they went back to live in Holland, and how Mom insisted that him and Alex, train on classical piano and all of that sort of stuff. And one of the funniest stories he told was that for about 3 consecutive years, in the midst of about 500 other kids, participants, they always got the number one slot for being the best. And at one point, his classical piano teacher dug up a new piece of music, and he told Eddie to stand with him at the piano and turn the pages at the appropriate movement. And it came to the turning of the page, and Eddie did not turn the page because he openly admitted that he could not read music. He just had sight memory. So he would look at the instructor's hands, and he knew exactly what he was playing. So when he had to sort of take his turn, he had it memorized, and he could play it exactly like his teacher. And so when the teacher started to play something new and was asking Eddie to turn the page, Eddie didn't know where it was on the sheet music because he couldn't read it.
Wow.
And he said the teacher was absolutely flabbergasted, Yeah. And then, of course, it goes on to his style of playing that we all came to love and know over the years. And he said, they didn't write sheet music; they completely rewrote it in tablature form. And he said, I can't read that either, so I can't tell you if what they've written down there that I'm supposed to have played is correct or not. So, how interesting, huh?
Yeah, absolutely. With Raiding the Rock Vault, do you guys cover Van Halen?
Oh yes, always a big. But we actually closed the show. We actually closed the show with Jump for the last 7 years. For the last 7 years, it's we had quite a number of songs that we could choose, but Jump was a big number one for them. A lot of people say it was their least favorite, but it's the one that everybody remembers. I mean, I just love the opening riff on Let's Talk About Love. I mean, who doesn't know that?
Right.
We chose, or the producers chose, Jump as the closer, and Raiding the Rock Vault used that for the last 7 years. Of course, we don't work right now because of this madness that continues.
Right.
And God knows when that'll change. With so many tours. It will end, I'm sure, like everything else ends, and we're very resilient as a human race, and we'll go forward. And the unfortunate thing is we won't have Eddie Van Halen except in our memories to go forward with us. So there you have it.
Right. Well, throughout your career, did you ever play any shows with Van Halen?
No, we did not. No, I know Michael Schenker just posted a really nice tribute to him, and Michael would talk about it because Michael, as a guitar player, is very particular about, he's something else I remember just in the last few days reading about Eddie. He didn't really listen to other people's music. He wasn't really influenced by other people's music. Michael Schenker has always, in my experience with him, has always been the same. He doesn't listen to another band. He goes, this is what we need to be doing. That's how I need to be playing. He's very much his own style. And he would always talk very highly of Eddie, of how, like everybody else, I mean, I'm not a guitar player, but for somebody like Michael, he would try to describe Eddie's style, and couldn't, other than the fact it was Eddie Van Halen, but loved his melodies, loved his songwriting, and had met him a number of times, of course, and it was just it was a cool dude, He was a very cool dude. So, for one great guitar player, giving such high accolades to him is pretty awesome, and so well deserved, of course. I mean, God knows, could we even count how many guitar players he influenced? How many guitar players struggled to learn Eruption because they felt that they had to be as good as Eddie Van Halen,
right?
And are they right? And are they? Of course not. But it was kind of part of their training, if you will.
Yeah.
If I can play this, I'm good.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, you mentioned, Michael Schenker was, already established whenever Eddie came out, but another guy you play with, especially recently, Reb Beach and Black Swan, is more. His style is more akin to Eddie. Like, what do you hear from him that might be something that he picked up from Eddie?
Yeah, he actually posted immediately. He said he was in the studio working with Kip, and when they received the news, and he says he just couldn't work for the rest of the day. He just stopped doing what he was doing. He was so devastated by the news, and he posted it and was making a comment like, "This can't be true. It just can't be true." And he goes, "I'm just worthless. I'm not able to do anything now." And working with Reb, which was huge for me, that man he's so talented. His depth of melody is just absolutely tremendous. Great songwriting. And now we have something like this, I think guitar players like Reb, etc., will carry the Eddie flag for as long as they can, with honor, as opposed to, trying to go, okay, I'm the new Eddie Van Halen. I don't think you'll ever see anything like that. And I hope they continue to fly the Eddie Van Halen flag, because I don't know, will we ever see anybody like that again? Long live Eddie Van Halen. Long live Eddie Van Halen. It'll be interesting to see what happens at this point. There was so much talk about Sammy coming back to do something. I know David started his sort of Vegas-style show also, and was doing some shows with Kiss. So we'll see what happens at this point. I'm sure there'll be lots of tributes paid to him as the months continue, and of course the fact that we are restricted regarding live work, but I'm sure something will be planned.
There you go, Robin McCauley of Black Swan, McCauley Schenker Group, Michael Schenker Fest. a huge thank you to Robin for taking some time there to talk about Eddie. And of course, a big thank you to Jody Best of Best Bet Promotions for helping us set that one up. Talking to Robin, he also mentioned outside of that Eddie Van Halen stuff that he has a solo album in the works, and Black Swan's already working on their next album. They're in their writing phase for their next album. So, but he said that'll probably be a little bit because Reb Beach is in the middle of working on the new Winger album.
I see.
But regardless, getting new music from all those bands in the coming year or two will be great. So once again, check out Robin McCauley's episode. He was on 255. I believe that was about the beginning of the year of 2020, before we knew what would happen this year.
Right.
And also check out the debut album from Black Swan. All right, next up is Eddie Valise of King, the vocalist and guitarist for King, a three-piece band I guess you could describe as stoner rock, groove rock, whatever you want to call it. Eddie Valise is a phenomenal vocalist and a great guitarist as well. This band, I know a lot of people know him, but then also a lot of people don't. And I hope that as time goes on, they turn from one of those underrated bands to a household name.
Definitely.
And I mean, I don't know if they've ever announced a replacement for Tony, the bass player, but as you'll hear in this thing, and I know that you've stated, the drummer Pepe is phenomenal as well.
Yeah.
And Eddie, of course, talks about that here coming up in a manner related to Van Halen. So let's just jump into it. Here's Eddie Valise of King.
Earliest memory, very vivid, and it's not really an impact of, it was just a band as an influence throughout where I grew up, no matter where you look. When Van Halen 1984 came out, I was a kid. I was like a young dude. I was like 3 or 4, and I had this very vivid memory of everybody wearing, Van Halen T-shirt, or they had the record. Everyone was super stoked because that had just come out, And for some odd reason, I have this. Every time I think of Van Halen, it's funny. And this is a side note. I always remember this kid who came out of a 7-Eleven, and he saw a GT on the floor, and he said it was parked outside, this bicycle, and he goes, "This is my bike." And he just jumped on it and stole it. Well, he had a Van Halen shirt on. That's the only thing I could really remember. I was like, dude, they just stole this guy's bike. He had the Van Halen shirt on. That's all I can remember. But man, I don't know, dude. Van Halen was just one of those bands, because I grew up in Los Angeles, East LA at that, so we were fairly close to Pasadena, so you kind of knew, there's all this stuff that, Van Halen played here, and they used to jam out in my uncle's backyard, and, they were called Mammoth and the whole thing, but, there's always this, you always kind of searched out, Van Halen, and you took a listen, when my ears developed enough to know what music actually was, and I got to hear Van Halen, Eddie Van Halen, his guitar playing was just outrageous. It was one of those things, especially at that time. He was such an iconic player, such an iconic band, that they were up there with like Coca-Cola and Disneyland and Michael Jackson and Van fucking Halen. Right. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like they were there. They were like that iconic in California, in the United States to us, So you couldn't go anywhere without hearing a Van Halen influence in Los Angeles for a minute,
Right. Was when you started playing guitar, were you influenced by him at all, or were you kind of going in another direction early on?
There's a handful of characters, when you start learning how to play guitar, I want myself at least, you kind of work with what your ability is,
Right.
So you start off, you want to play like Eddie Van Halen. There was years before I even attempted anything that Eddie Van Halen did, I was just that like, man, I'm never going to play anything like that. Listen to that. How the hell does it sound like that? How the hell does he do that? You fuck off and you do tapping. You know, everybody does a tap, but not like Eddie Van Halen. You know what I'm saying? Like everybody, oh yeah, check this out. And you go, you know, do this little open thing on the 12 and the 5 and the 7. You know, and it sounds like a tap that Eddie Van Halen, you know, may have, you know, fucked off to, but nothing like he actually played. You know, the stuff that he actually played, you're just like, holy crap, you know, like where does it even start? Where does it end? Where do you go? And the timing was always weird. It was stressed. You know, we did this thing. We do every now and again, and it became a staple for him. And we do Hot for Teacher. King would do Hot for Teacher.
Right.
And people ask about it all the time. And that was kind of one of my first attempts at really trying to play a song all the way through. But, you know, because I learned like a bit of Eruption, and I learned little bits of Spanish Fly, and, you know, Little Dreamer and Janie's Crying, all those songs, you always kind of just play the riff, you know, check it out. But never went all the way through with it, you know, and we got bought up to do this Harley Davidson, like 50 anniversary Harley Davidson thing in Wisconsin. And at that time, I think we only had an album worth of music, you know, so we're like, oh, we need to play an hour. And they're like, well, we should do something. We all kind of thought about it. And we're like, yeah, Black Sabbath, if we do a Sabbath song, it's a little redundant for us. We always, you know, we love Sabbath. We always do Sabbath stuff. And we're like, well, let's try to do a Soundgarden tune, you know? And you're like, yeah, that's kind of like a given. You know, what's something weird that everybody would be like, why the fuck are those dudes playing? What are they playing, you know? We're like, let's just try to shoot for Hot for Teacher. You know, and every time it creates a big old, you know, if you're familiar with our music, you know, we're nothing like Van Halen, you know, so we're like, fuck it, let's just try to do Hot for Teacher. And we gave ourselves a week. You know, it's like, all right, well, I'm going to have to fucking play this shit, you know, and sing it at the same time. And I don't know if you noticed, but, you know, David Lee Roth, he comes in, it's very strange. Like his like, it's all like, that's wild, you know, it's like a fucking madman singing, you know?
Yeah.
And then the preciseness of Eddie Van Halen. So I was trying to do both, and I just gave up. I was like, you know, I'm just going to fucking do it as close as I possibly can, because these are two really hard parts to play, you know? So we gave ourselves a week. That first week, we were like, well, let's try it and see where we are. And we started on Monday. And by the time Friday came along, we were right in the vicinity. We're like, well, this is kind of cool. Let's just try it, you know? So it took all of us about a week just to even wrap our heads around doing a good version of it, you know? Something that we could say like, yeah, we do this song and it's pretty badass, you know?
Yeah.
And we did it, and people were just like blown away, you know?
We've had a lot of very cool stories just by playing that song. You know, we did a song, the Gas Monkey in Dallas, you know?
Right.
And this was before we did any touring with Hell Yeah or Vinnie Paul. And I forget who we were out with, but it was a fairly big show. And everyone's like, oh, well, Vinnie Paul's going to be here. Vinnie Paul's, we're like, wow, that'd be awesome. You know, Vinnie Paul comes out. So we're on stage, we're jamming, we're playing, and then, you know, the side, you know, some off stage was like, hey, Vinnie Paul's here, do fucking Hot for Teacher. And we're like, oh, yeah, let's do it. And we look, we see Vinnie, we start playing the song, and I could see him in the corner of my eye. He was kind of by himself in this fucking, at this place. Crack through it, finish the song, finish our set, get all our gear off, and Vinnie Paul is just standing right there. And I walk up to him, hey, Vin, how are you, man? Nice to meet you. And he's just like, oh, Hot for Teacher, huh? That's a good one. That's a good. Me and my brother used to play that song all the time, man. You guys did it good. And that was it. Like, that's all he said. And I was like, wow, dude, he fucking blew my mind. You know, like just that little minute of him saying, yeah. And it was kind of cool because it put him in a spot where he was very reminiscent. You know, like me and my brother used to play that song all the time. You know,
absolutely.
It was just like, man. Very cool little story for me, and it was just like a minute in my life, and it meant the world to me, you know. And I got a big old hug from him, and you know, about a year later, I think we did our tour with them, yeah, with Hell Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Was that the very first time you guys played Hot for Teacher live? Was it pretty nervous, like getting up there and playing that in front of people, or were you confident at that point after?
We were, there was this weird thing, Hot for Teacher, that in the solo itself. Well, first and foremost, Pepe, my drummer, he nailed that drum section, that open part, where it sounds like a motorcycle or a muffler or something, going off. He did that, and he does the both parts. And that's another cool story about Vinnie Paul. When my drummer came through the back, he in backstage, Vinnie Paul kind of pulled him aside. He's like, "Hey, man." He's like, I never really heard anybody do both parts. Like, that's cool. And so there's always that nobody really knows how Alex Van Halen recorded that. You're like, oh, well, it's 2 drum parts. And everyone's like, no, it's just 1 drum part. And then I heard, some dudes talking about how, like, no, that was Eddie Van Halen's muffler, and they recorded it. And it was like a whole thing where, like, it's just a whole folklore about it. And I was like, well, my drummer can do both parts, so it's a very cool thing for us. But yeah, it's always like a tightrope act, because there is every time King plays, it's a tightrope act, because it's just only 3 of us, and we're trying to put out so much sound, and we're playing so many different fucking things. We're like overplaying, but trying to underplay it, overplaying by underselling. I don't know. So when we're trying to do something like Hot for Teacher, it's tough. Especially it was tough when we were doing that solo, that there's a whole part.
Yeah.
That coming out of that solo always threw us off, because there's this weird snare roll that kind of jumps out of nowhere. It's like bam, bam, bam. So we would always kind of fuck that. Then eventually it kind of locked, and we were like, oh, it's like waiting for that knuckleball. You got to wait for that pitch. Just wait for it, pow, and then you get the home run. But it was always eluding us. I'd either fuck it up, or Tony, my bass player at the time, would fuck it up, or somebody. We'd always fuck up that one section. But eventually we fell in line, and now we nail it every fucking time we do it. But, yeah, man. That's the only part that really. But we never really tried anything else. We didn't really stretch the boundaries. Like, once we got there, we were pretty okay. We're like, man, we did it, and it's cool, and people asked for it, so let's not break it. Let's not do anything else.
Right.
Because again, I told my buddy Jim Rhoda he plays in a band called Fireball Ministry. I've known him for a minute. Right. He actually did our second record, produced our second record. I was like, man, I've been playing guitar since I was like 15. I'm 40 now, so it's like I got this far by literally honing in on 2 or 3 of Eddie Van Halen's tricks. It's like you can only steal from the masters, and I can only do so much. Like my tapping sucks. I'm not great at it. My shred ability is okay at best, but there's this thing that I always kind of followed where, he would do all that natural harmonic stuff, and then all of a sudden you hear him doing these like weird harmonics over chords, like, well, how the fuck is he doing that, and and they're all, he's doing all these crazy. I was like, how the fuck is he getting these natural harmonics? And I'm trying to do it like pinch harmonics and trying to do all this other shit and just not working. And then I realized the simplicity of him fretting a chord, and then just climbing up to the 12 of whatever chord he's in, and just tapping away as you would a natural harmonic over an open E on the 12th fret,
Gotcha.
Blew my mind. I was like, how in the fuck do you think of that? Like, holy, and no one's doing that. Nobody did that until he did it, really. Yeah. And then once he did all that stuff, the tapping, the harmonics, the dive bombs and all that stuff, and then all of a sudden everybody was like, okay, I need to play like that. And then you had all these other bands that get pretty close, but not fucking EVH.
Right. Well, besides, say, Hot for Teacher, what's kind of like, what would be your go-to if you're going to listen to Van Halen right now?
Oh man, I went into this very early on in my younger years. I would just listen to literally Diver Down all the time, Van Halen 2 all the time. Just most of the Roth years, you know, my girl, she really likes all the Hagar stuff. I guess it reminds her of her family. But I'm like, no, David Lee Roth, man. Yeah, man. You know, it's funny. One of my favorite songs, one of my favorite of all times. What is it? God, the name escapes me right now. It's the one where Eddie Van Halen's dad played the oboe. Big Bad Will.
Oh, yeah.
Sweet William now.
Big Bad Bill.
Mopping
Yeah.
up that floor. Big Bad Bill, yeah. That's one of my favorites. I'll always go back and listen to that. Just, especially, you know, even the oboe solo itself, you know, I'm pretty sure, I think I read somewhere that his dad did the solo. You know? Just him playing, if you go back and listen to that, it's kind of amazing. You know, where he's sticking these notes and, you know, all this, the open, you know, where he's not playing notes and where the breaths are and all that. It's just so fucking perfect. And you're like, oh, wow, there's the lineage, you know, like that's probably where they got it all from. Cause that dude seemed like he played really well in that song. So I'm assuming his son did, you know, just took it that extra, alien like playing ability to his music, you know.
There you go. Eddie Valise of King. He was with us on episode 96. That's been now, probably 3 years ago now. We need to get him back, him or Pepe, you know, for a full-on interview.
Right.
Because it's been a while.
Yes, it has.
To see what the band's future plans are, because I hope it's something. You remember when we had him on and he sang to us?
I know, that was great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I fanboyed out.
Yeah.
Not
He just,
gonna
like,
lie.
jumped in the van and lay down.
Right.
Did the interview laying down. It's like, hey, whatever works, you know.
Stay comfy.
You've been driving all day. You deserve to lay down. But yeah, check out episode 96 with Eddie. And if you're not familiar with King, check out their albums. They are some great stuff.
KYNG.
That's right. Oh yeah, I should say that. So don't type in the regular spelling of King. All right, next up, we've got Mike Ariza. Mike Ariza has been on this podcast a few times.
Yes.
He's a great guitarist from the band Healing the Fray. And he was also part of the Frank Halen band for a bit when they did the 6-String Soldiers tour and album. That album's phenomenal, by the way, so check that out if you haven't. Healing the Fray's debut full-length album came out earlier this year. They also had an EP come out a couple years ago. So check out all that. Mike was on here on way back, episode 12. I believe Mike might be the first person we ever had on this podcast that we didn't know.
Yeah, I think so.
You know, I didn't look, but I think that's right.
Right.
So there's a little bit of history and significance there for Mike on our podcast. He was also, after episode 12, he was on episode 74. And then again, more recently, earlier this year, episode 271. And both of those, he was joined by Jeff Sandoval, who's the vocalist for Healing the Fray. And he was the vocalist for Frank Halen Band during that same period. And his vocals are phenomenal as well.
Great stuff.
Yeah. So check out that Healing the Fray album. It's just great, beautiful rock and roll. I promise you, you love Van Halen, you will love Healing the Fray. So let's jump into this and hear what Mike Ariza has to say.
I put out a social media post the day that he passed that he made a guitar electric, you know, and there's never has been or will there ever be anybody else to do that to the instrument and just change the world. I mean, just period. The showmanship of it, the riffs, the writing, the piano playing, that smirk that he had, right?
Yeah.
You know, I'll never forget, I was playing baseball, and gosh, it must have been, third, fourth grade, something like that. And the guy that was the pitcher was a really good friend of mine, you know, and his mom and my mom were, you know, teen moms. And so, you know, it was after a baseball game, and we went to his older cousins, and we went to the basement. And we were listening to Kiss records. When he came down the stairs, he's like, I don't mind you guys playing these. He's older. He's like, but these are collectors, so be careful. And then he's like, do you want to hear something cool? And I heard Eruption for the first time. And it was just like, oh my God, what is this? It sounded so big, so massive.
and just like something I'd never heard my entire life. And that moment forever changed my life like it did everybody else, you know. In fact, my very first guitar that my parents purchased me was a Hondo. I don't know, you know, the guitar players that grew up, you know, back at that time will remember it was a Hondo Stratocaster, but it was painted to replicate Van Halen. And I had to have it. And my mom still has a Polaroid of me with it. And I mean, that was the impact. Like, I wanted to be Eddie Van Halen. I wanted to be like a combination of Eddie Van Halen and Paul Stanley and Ace Frehley and Angus Young. But although everybody else mentioned in that were great, Eddie Van Halen was Eddie Van Halen, you know. And then as I got older as a musician and got more into the guitar, you know, 1984 came out, and then honestly, the early Van Halen undoubtedly is just, you know, epic. But for me, excuse me, when OU812 came out, his style changed, and he had Sammy Hagar, and the growth of him as a songwriter. 5150 is honestly probably one of my favorite Van Halen albums from front to back. In fact, I have it on my turntable right now. Everybody knows that I play Soldano amplifiers. Well, there was a rumor, you know, back then, the Live Without a Net, that, you know, on that tour that Eddie was taking the Soldano rig with him. And I saw a picture of Eddie Van Halen in a magazine sitting in the studio, and he had two Soldanos behind him, and I had to have one. So once again, back to Impact, all these years later, I still have that Soldano that I bought in 1992, and I have the other ones as well, because of that picture, right? And everybody was buying, you know, just like everybody bought those Plexi Marshalls and were, you know, trying to do the circuitry stuff, keeping them clean, running them low power like Eddie did. I bought the Soldano, and man, I could go on forever on the impact that Eddie Van Halen had to me as an artist, as a guitar player, as a songwriter. One thing that I'd really like to talk about, and I know we're limited on time, is yes, the leads and all that, but man, if you go back and if you really listen to the riffs, you know, I mean, he was tuning down, you know, in rock music before everybody else that I know of. It made it sound cool. Unchained. I mean, that riff, are you kidding me? Right? Dirty Movies, you know, just so greasy and heavy. I mean, you would be hard pressed to not find somebody that was influenced by Eddie Van Halen. And then, you know, him on Beat It, right? He was just that unprecedented, you know, just doing things that nobody else could. And I spent like a greater part of last night and today just looking at all the tributes from all of the great fans and artists all over the world, man. I mean, he touched everybody. Everybody knows who Eddie Van Halen is. And the people in the industry always highlighted, from what I've seen so far, how great of a person he was. And, you know, seeing some of the snaps and the images and short video clips of him as a father, being a father myself, really speaks to me now. I know that was long-winded, but man, I just, you know, like Prince, I think we all took Eddie Van Halen for granted a little. And, you know, and I told Jeff Sandoval, my brother, I was so heartbroken. I was like, and and this is no disrespect to anybody. I was like, dude, the electric guitars has passed away with Eddie.
Yeah, it's a great point. Did you get a chance to see Van Halen live?
You know, I did not. It was they came to Albuquerque for 1984, and my brother was going to take me, and there's my parents and this and that, and there were some times when that later after that, believe it or not, there was a period of my life where I was a young father, and I was excuse me, I was busy trying to support my son at that time, and I didn't, just contracts wasn't the thing for me back then. So I was trying to get things stabilized, which is more important. I regret it, but the impact that those records had probably outweigh seeing a concert to me. One other memory that just popped into my head was I was never a good student in school, and every year I had to do summer school. And by like the third time, my mom was like, "I've had it." She's like, "You're taking your ass to summer school yourself." And I used to ride at a Harlow Sport, and I used to ride it, about 4 miles to go to school in the summer. And that summer, when the Walkman was out, I would have enough batteries to make it there and make it back. And only had enough room for one tape, and that tape was 1984.
Wow.
And just one of my favorite riffs from that album is "Drop Dead Legs." In fact, we did a song with Frank Hannon on the Six String Soldiers album, and the name of the song is called "Lipstick Smoking Gasoline." If you listen to the tail end of "Drop Dead Legs," you can kind of hear how I inverted that riff, because once again, that influence, a lot of the songs that I've written with what we've evolved into now as Healing the Fray are tuned down in drop D. And it's that influence of, Eddie, like doing the Unchained and stuff like that. It's just so beefy. Every guitar player will do this. If you want to see if an amp has quote unquote it, you're going to play that riff from Unchained, or any Van Halen riff. They call it the Brown sound. Not only did he lead as a guitarist, a performer, and a songwriter and a piano player, but he also led in technology and was an amazing, brilliant branding, mindset. The EVH brand, he started to deal with PV and Kramer, building his own guitars. I mean, the guy was a guitar player, and I think now we should reflect back and look at how organic he was with the instrument. And we've gotten lazy, myself included, with plugins and, the fractal audios and the Kemper. I mean, those are cool and stuff like that. But, this guy was, Eddie Van Halen built his own guitar and had the most basic amp that anybody could play unmodded, and was Eddie Van Halen, and there's not a whole lot of people that can do that. That's why there's always has been and will always only be one Eddie Van Halen. And that's why, no disrespect to my fellow six-string soldiers out there, the guitar players, but part of me feels like the guitar is resting with, as a craft, is resting with Eddie Van Halen, because who can top that? Nobody.
There you go, Mike Ariza of Healing the Fray and Frank Hannon Band. Always love talking to Mike. He is a very well-spoken guy, and I believe, when you talk to him, you can tell he's an extremely intelligent guy. Love talking to him about everything we've talked to him about in the past, and of course, right now, talking about Eddie. So once again, check out Healing the Fray if you're not familiar with them. Check out Frank Hannon Band's album, Six String Soldiers, to hear Mike on that album as well. Huge thank you to Mike for taking the time here. All right, next up, this one's pretty cool.
Right.
This was kind of surprising because this interview just kind of came together pretty quick. And actually the week after Eddie passed this last week. Actually, it was just a couple days, I think, after, maybe it was 2 weeks ago now. Regardless, we set up this album with Page Hamilton because he's a guy I know I've wanted to get on here since the beginning, and I'm sure you have as well.
Of course.
Front man for Helmet. Going back to our love for that mid-90s kind of dirty, stonery rock and roll. I wouldn't say that they're a stoner rock band, but they kind of, get lumped in those categories with COC and Prong and the like,
Right.
Page Hamilton has not been on this podcast previously, but there is a full-on episode with him coming here in the next few weeks. That is a good lengthy one, almost an hour.
Yes.
And he talks about all kinds of stuff. And one of those things being Eddie Van Halen. So let's hear what Page Hamilton of Helmet has to say.
Ain't talking about love, the groove on that. It's like this fucking old time rock and roll meets modern something, and it stands the test of time. I love. It's so funny when we were working with Steve Albini over in Chicago at Chicago Recording Company. It's where we recorded the demo of In the Meantime, which became the master on the album, because I always thought the demo was better than what we did in New York at the studio. We did a song called Rock Messiah and I think FBLA 2 or something like that. There were a handful of recordings. Anyway, we were staying at Steve's and we were driving to the studio, and I said something about Panama, and Albini goes, "I don't like bad music." And I was just like excuse me? Like, what? And this kind of attitude of our indie world, touch and go, AMREP, SST, Homestead, whatever, that something, because something had some kind of cock rock attitude to it, that it wasn't cool because David Lee Roth wore like fringe pants. I don't know what people's thinking was. I always base my love or not love of music on the music. I'm a jazz nerd, and I didn't know what they look like on stage. I drop the needle, I listen to it, and I go, yay or nay. And as Duke Ellington said, there are two kinds of music, good and bad. Yeah. And everyone has an opinion. Everyone, anyone can think whatever they want, but people have to realize those are their own biases. And my old drummer didn't like Hendrix, and I gave him Axis Bold as Love, and he's like, "Yeah, it wasn't as bad as I thought." And I'm like, people don't realize that that's a shortcoming in their musical fabric. Okay, that's not the fault of Hendrix. That's not the fault of Van Halen. There's no denying the brilliance. Okay, I'm sorry. It's just the first time I heard that, it was the same thing as AC/DC, where my jaw dropped, and I'm like, it just had this sound, everything, the way the whole thing was put together, bass, drums, guitar, vocals, that was just completely different from anything that I'd ever heard before, and I realized right then and there, well, I'll never be able to do that. It wasn't one of my musical goals to play like Eddie. I have a different thing that's my vocabulary, but I just said, even if I tried for a year and worked on that, I would just never be able to do that. It's so incredibly fluid. It's like water flowing over moss-covered stones in a river. It's beyond the guitar, right? It's music that is like, it takes you to this place. You're in this song, and here's this cool groove, whatever, and all of a sudden this guitar comes in, and it's just like, I want to describe it as a pterodactyl, like a prehistoric beast or some kind of flock of birds or something. Like, what is that? It's not just a guitar, because it's a magical, fucking amazing thing. And I've never disparaged something like that I didn't, because I didn't understand it. You know what I mean? And I always say to musicians, you have a shortcoming, and that's fine. You can maintain your stubbornness and not experience this joy, but I choose to experience this joy. It's like, so yeah, fucking A, man. Like, what what a dude. Like, you know, it's just the perfect setting. A friend of mine had sent me Hot for Teacher that night when he passed, and I hadn't seen the video in about a million years. It's like maybe the greatest MTV music video ever made, you know.
Yeah.
And that's such a fucking sick fucking song. I mean, just like the drum part, the whole thing, you know, the lyrics, it's just like that's something else, man. That's a great loss. It's just sad. You know, I never got to see him. It's my fault. It's completely my fault. I miss Johnny Cash. I miss John Lee Hooker. I missed Van Halen. And it's my fault completely. I miss Led Zeppelin. It's not my fault. But.
Right.
There you go, Paige Hamilton of Helmet. A huge thank you to Brian from Main Road Management for helping set that one up. And like I mentioned earlier, a full episode from Paige Hamilton talking about all kinds of great stuff from Helmet and everything else coming up here pretty soon, so be on the lookout for that. All right, next up, we've got Tyler Bryant. Tyler Bryant, of course, is the singer and guitarist for Tyler Bryant and the Shakedown. This band is relatively new compared to a lot of the bands we've had on here. This was their third album, I think, that just came out here. It actually just came out Friday.
That's great.
3 or 4 days ago. Yeah, like Jason said, Pressure. It's fantastic.
Yes, it is.
Bluesy, rocky, all kinds of great stuff. Tyler Bryant is a newer guy on the scene, but he definitely is a force to be reckoned with, and I think Tyler Bryant's one of those names that if we were doing a podcast in 2050, people will still be talking about him. So, get on the Tyler Bryant and Shakedown train if you're not. Let's check this out. Here's Tyler Bryant talking about Eddie Van Halen.
Oh man, yeah, Eddie meant a great deal to me. My first guitar as a child was a children's version of the Frankenstein Strat. You know, a little mini version. And as I got older and started getting into Van Halen, he became one of those guitar heroes that seemed larger than life to me. Yeah, I mean, there's never been anyone else to do it like that before. So I just keep thinking, like, yeah, I feel lucky that I was alive at the same time as him.
Yeah. Well, it's, you know, someone that's more, you know, the Shakedown's more blues based in your style. Like, what do you think you might do in your playing now that was directly influenced by what Eddie brought along, even though he was more of kind of a shredder?
Well, I mean, there's certain things that I've, you know, there's like a couple of little things that he would do with the finger tapping, to where it wasn't like the really fast finger tapping like a lot of people know him for. He was able to do these like one tap licks that would almost make the guitar sound like a slide. And so, I mean, that's something I stole that from him a long time ago, which I think he might have gotten that from Billy Gibbons. I'm not sure, but you know, there are little things in my playing that I've learned from watching Eddie Van Halen videos over the years, that I'll just keep doing, you know, and just, you know, I just think about him a little more when I do it now.
What's your favorite song or riff or anything from Eddie?
I don't know. It's probably, I really do like Ice Cream Man.
Yeah.
But this is like on one of their last records, there was a song called As Is, and it had this heavy, low-tuned riff. And that's the thing, is he, like, even like on their last records, he was still just crushing it.
Yeah. Did you ever get a chance to see him live?
No, I did not, but I wish that I would have.
Yeah.
Did you?
Yeah, but it's been back. I saw him on the Balance Tour in '96.
How was it?
Oh, it was fantastic. I mean, I kind of came up in that, you know, era where I was a bigger fan of the Hagar era than I was the early stuff. And then as I got older, you know, it's pretty even now, but you know, to be able to see that tour, I love that album, and I just think it's so underrated and underappreciated. So I'm glad I got to see that.
Yeah. That's awesome, man. Yeah, we got to work with this producer, Andy Johns, who did the For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge record, and he had some great stories. And but yeah, that's the thing is, like, I never really got picked a side where it was like David Lee Roth or Sammy Hagar, because to me I was just like Eddie was that band. Like both of those frontmen and singers, and those guys are insane, and they're bringing so much to the table in very different ways. But for me, it was like, cool, if Eddie's there, I'm there. I'm for it.
Yeah.
There you go, Tyler Bryant of Tyler Bryant and Shakedown. Huge thank you to Tyler for taking some time out there. And also a huge thank you to John Freeman from Freeman Promotions for helping with that one. We've got a full episode with Tyler coming up here in the coming weeks as well, talking about the new album Pressure, which like we said is great. So check that out. It just came out this past week. I promise if you love some rock and roll, you're going to love Tyler Bryant and Shakedown.
Oh, yeah.
All right. This will be the final guest we have. Can you believe it? We made it this far.
We made it through the list, man.
Yeah.
Man.
And we're getting heavy again.
Yeah.
We kicked this. Hey, I didn't even think about that. The way we lined these up. We bookend this with some heavy stuff. We started with Battlecross.
Sandwiched with heaviness.
Yeah.
My favorite.
And we're ending with Devil Driver. Mike Spreitzer is the guitarist for Devil Driver. Long ass time now, 16 years. And he's got a few things to say about Eddie. We recorded a full episode with him this past week. And of course, towards the end of it, we talked about Eddie. And we got that here for you now. So here's Mike Spreitzer of Devil Driver talking about Eddie Van Halen.
Of course. My oldest brother and sister were teenagers in the 80s. And, I was born in 81. So I was pretty young. And luckily they were watching, I'm sure they had a big influence on me as a kid getting into music, because they were watching MTV. And, we only had one TV back then in the house. And so I was watching MTV with them because, my older brother and sister, they were super cool to me. And, my sister definitely listened to Van Halen quite a bit. And, I would never consider myself a huge Van Halen fan, but I mean, you can't deny the guy's guitar playing. I mean, it is just so incredible. And Eddie has had more of an influence on me just because of his guitar tone and the amps that he helped design back in the day. The PV 5150 block letter, which I believe was the first amp that came out that he put his name on. I mean, I still use it. We just, we used it a lot on Dealing with Demons. It's a fantastic sounding amp, and I would say that's where he's influenced me the most, rather than writing. It's just straight guitar tone. And I did get to meet him once. I never got to see him live, but I did get to meet him briefly. One of my good friends is the senior photographer for Guitar Center. And at the time, my girlfriend at the time was doing hair and makeup for all those photo sessions. So I tagged along one day, and, when they were shooting Eddie, and I got to meet him and hang out with him very briefly. He was super cool. He was super pro, really nice guy. And I'm very bummed that I never got to see him live, but I am thankful that I got to meet him in person at least once.
Well, I mean, you kind of mentioned it with the amps and the tone. Like, what do you think impact he might have had on you, or like anyone in like heavier music like Devil Driver is? Because most people just talk about the shredding or the party vibe of Van Halen.
I don't think I don't think anyone in Devil Driver has ever been a massive Van Halen fan. So as far as writing goes, I don't think that he's had a massive or almost any kind of influence on us directly. But Eddie had so much influence on other people, like Jerry Cantrell was, Eddie was a big inspiration for Jerry, and also Dimebag as well. And Jerry's it probably is my all-time favorite guitar player. And so there's definitely an indirect influence on me that Eddie channeling through Jerry and then channeling through me. So, I mean, Eddie has influenced everyone. He's kind of like Genghis Khan. They say that like 1 out of every 5 people in the world is somehow related to Genghis Khan because he just had so many children over his lifetime.
Yeah.
I feel like Eddie is the Genghis Khan of the guitar world. He's just like, if you play guitar, somehow he's had some influence on you, either directly or indirectly.
There you go, Mike Spreitzer, guitarist of Devil Driver. A huge thank you to him for talking to us there about Eddie. And like I said earlier, we've got a full episode with him coming up soon. Big thank you to John Freeman of Freeman Promotions for helping put that one together. All right. 14 guests.
We did it.
Yeah, if you're still here, we appreciate it. I hope you're still here.
That was an extravaganza, but it needed to happen because, I mean, it was a sad but gigantic event. So
yeah, I didn't mention up front, like I meant to, that I haven't timed out this yet, but I know with what we've said and what 14 guests said that this will likely probably be the longest episode we've ever had.
Right. Well,
because I know we've had...
This would be one for it.
Yeah, it's deservedly.
Yes.
We've had a few that were long. I remember one with W. Adore. Or no, it was Claim Your Enemy after they changed the name.
Mm-hmm.
That one was over 2 hours, and then we had one with Andy Papadopoulos, which was over 2 hours. And then our one with Sid Falk, formerly of Overkill, would have probably been longer than this one, but we broke it up into two.
Yes.
Part 1 and Part 2. But I didn't want to do that with this. I'm like, let's just put all this together. Because if you're an Eddie Van Halen fan, I think it's cool, to hear what 14 musicians and that are in the industry have to say.
Yeah, you're gonna listen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, like I said, we span heaviness. We had just dudes that are pure rock and roll, guys that have been around since the beginning with Eddie, and then guys that are new on the scene. So it's cool to be able to talk to all these guys. And like I mentioned, after all of them, if we had help from Freeman Promotions and of course Jody Best, helped bring on several past guests. A huge thank you to both them. And a huge thank you to everybody that I just reached out to, like Eddie Valise and Mike Ariza and so on, that I just hit up on Messenger on Facebook and said, hey, let's do this, and they agreed. So
yeah, it was a total honor to for all this to get lined up. Good work, man.
Yeah. It just kind of, like I said earlier, we were going to just do an episode where we talked with someone and it just spiraled out of control.
Yeah.
And it almost got overwhelming to me there for a minute. But yeah, after contacting everybody and it kind of got overwhelming because I thought, if we send out 20, 25 messages, we'll get lucky if we get 10 or 12 of them. And then the majority of them responded. And I even had a few that responded and said they would do it, but we just couldn't work out a time.
Right, yeah.
And, so this could have been even longer if it had worked out that way. But
exactly.
And I imagine going forth on the podcast, there will probably be people in the future that we talked to Eddie about because he had such an impact on everybody.
Yeah.
So kind of like I mentioned throughout that, we've got episodes now coming up with Mike Spreitzer of Devil Driver, Mitch Perry of the Mitch Perry Group, Paige Hamilton of Helmet, Tyler Bryant of Shakedown. Who else? Eric Bass, our good buddy.
Yes.
Who has been in a lot of acts around the Tulsa area. Then we've got ones with Blake Bedsall from Saul. We've got
Alan Robert back.
There you go. Yeah, we hadn't even announced that one because I think that was recorded since the last time.
Exactly.
Yeah, Alan Robert of Life of Agony will be back. And I know there's a couple more that I should have had this all written down, but I did not.
God damn you.
But regardless, you'll see it all coming here in the coming weeks. Mercedes Lander was on here recently, and Blabbermouth picked that up, so check that out. We've also had recent ones with everybody that was just on here. Guys from Guns N' Roses and Kiss, Megadeth, Testament, Crowbar, Shinedown. A long-ass list.
Right.
TheThunderUnderground.com is the website. You can listen on there. You can also see reviews. You can find all our socials on there. So click on all the socials and like us or follow us. If you ever see a post from us, just do us a favor and like it or comment on it or anything. That helps get the word spread around. We would greatly appreciate it. You can listen to us pretty much everywhere podcasts are heard. Next week, we've got Sammy Hagar coming up.
God, I wish.
We do not. Actually, I have not planned what our next episode is going to be, but we've got some good ones, so...
It'll be a good one.
Pretty excited. Yeah, Damon Johnson's the one I didn't mention.
Right, yeah.
That one's coming up. It'll be one of those guys, one of those people we just listed, so be on the lookout for all that. And there you go. Any last words about Eddie? Or have we said it all, I think?
We said it all.
All right.
You know, rest in peace.
There you go. Once again, massive thank you to Freeman Promotions, Best Bet Promotions, Main Road Management, all 14 of our guests for taking some time out to talk to us. Hella Hot Sauce, Sunset Tattoo, Med Farm, and DEB Concerts. And until next time.
Thunder Underground, y'all.